Chapter 101. Reactions from All Sides. Time passed quietly, and before long, Damien and the others had grown on Renault's team. As they strolled toward the temple that morning, Renault tossed 2 hefty fish over his shoulder and glanced at Damien with a grin. "Damien, you and your friends are in incredible shape. Why aren't you in the Nova Corps instead of working as city guards?" Renault and Kyle might have been the strongest fighters he knew, but Damien's own strength still left ordinary Xandarians in the dust. With muscles like his, he could have aced any Nova Corps entrance exam without breaking a sweat. Damien shrugged modestly. "To be honest, none of us had the nerve to sign up for the front lines or face the rigorous assessments, so we settled for the city guard." Renault laughed. "But guarding the city doesn't exactly bring in the big credits." Damien ran a hand through his hair. "I know. I've been thinking seriously about taking the Nova Corps test soon, see if I can earn something more substantial." Their banter carried them around the corner and through the sprawling courtyard of Lord Cassadine's estate. They'd come to pay their respects, and perhaps bring news of their exploits, but when they arrived at the main hall, only Miss Sonia was there to receive them. Sonia stood at the foot of the grand staircase, her expression polite but reserved. She bowed courteously. "Welcome, gentlemen. Lord Cassadine is indisposed today, but I'll be happy to pass along your greetings." Damien exchanged glances with Renault. Despite the empty house, Sonia's poised calm hinted that she knew far more than she let on. Renault hoisted one of the fish off his shoulder and offered it to her with a sly smile. "For Lord Cassadine, freshly caught. Thought he might appreciate a gift from the sea." Sonia's lips curved in a faint smile as she accepted the fish bucket. "He will be most grateful. Please, come inside. Would you care for tea while you wait?" The group followed her into the spacious receiving room, the scent of jasmine drifting through the air. As they settled on plush cushions, Sonia ensured servants brought refreshments. Outside, the guards changed shifts, oblivious to the tense anticipation building within Cassadine's walls. Renault leaned in and whispered to Damien, "Something tells me this won't be just a courtesy call." Damien nodded, his gaze drifting toward the closed doors at the far end of the room. Whatever awaited them next, they'd face it together, and he resolved that if the Nova Corps exam was on the table, he'd take it, no matter what. And so, in the quiet hush before the storm, all parties felt the first stirrings of change. Damien sensed at once that Master Cassadine had chosen to extend his blessing to them, so he wisely kept his counsel to himself. "Honestly," he remarked as they strode down the rain-slicked quay, "if you want real freedom, ditch the Nova Corps and become a bounty hunter like us. Pull off one big job, then you've earned a year, maybe even a year and a half, off to do whatever you please." Kyle laughed, shifting 5 hefty fish stacked on his shoulder with startling ease. "Yeah," he said, voice echoing off the warehouse walls, "we've got nice houses, fine wine, and let's not forget the company of beautiful women. No commanders barking orders at our heels. Sounds a lot more comfortable to me." "I'll admit, the Nova armor is tempting," another of Damien's brothers joined in, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. "Bounty hunting's all fine and good, but having the Legion's backing, that feels like real security." Damien felt a flicker of envy at the thought of unlimited credits and official protection, but he shook his head. His heart was set on a steadier, more predictable life. The 4 of them traded jests and half-serious boasts as they made their way through the winding streets toward the Temple of the Void. Though night had fallen, the temple courtyard glowed under lantern light, casting long shadows across the marble stones. At its center loomed the familiar silhouette of Lord Cassadi, in statue, his outstretched blade raised in silent benediction. Damien halted, clasped his hands, and lowered his head in respectful prayer. One by one, his brothers dropped to their knees, pressing their foreheads to the cold stone tiles. In that hush, they felt the presence of Cassadine's grace settle over them like a quiet promise. They were chosen, watched over, and, no matter which path they took, never truly alone. In just a month's time, their lives, and even their ideals, had been transformed. But when the 3 of them saw Damien bowing before Cassadine's statue, they instinctively followed suit. Renault watched their synchronized gesture with a thoughtful gleam in his eyes. From the moment Damien first met Cassadine, he had addressed him as Sir, and spoken of him with unabashed admiration. Though he'd done his best to conceal that reverence in conversation, standing before the statue now, he couldn't hide his respect. Renoli understood Damien's secret, but chose not to expose him. With Damien and the others now officially part of the Void cult, they seemed to have acquired strange new abilities. That fact only strengthened Renoli's resolve to join as well. It was clear that Kassadin didn't micromanage his followers. He issued orders only when necessary, and otherwise left them free. Eager to cement his place among them, Renoli called down to Lacey. Together, they built a small fire at the temple's base and set a grill over the flames to roast the fish they'd caught. The scent of cooking fish mingled with incense smoke, sealing their unspoken pact to follow the Void's path. Several figures gathered around the fire, making a temporary camp. By midday, word had spread across the galaxy that Kassadin himself had masterminded the breakout. Rumors flew through star system news feeds. Join the glorious evolution? Is this Kassadin luring people into a trap? Aboard a stealth cruiser, Peter Quill, Star-Lord, leaned back in his command chair, half listening to his music while scrolling through the latest headlines. He frowned. Kassadin's definitely building his power base. He'll hand out perks, sure, but how deep do his pockets really go? His companion, Yondu Udanta, idly tapped his fin to the beat. Yeah, but those perks won't come courtesy of a death sentence. That everyone's welcome pitch doesn't exactly apply to guys like us, bounty hunters and so-called predators. Quill swiped the screen. What's got me intrigued is that Kassadin picked Xandar for his big debut. That world's always been a strategic hotspot. We'd best keep our eyes peeled. Yondu cracked a grin. Smart Nova Corps troops might get wise and steer clear, but anyone foolish enough to poke at Kassadin's new Void cult, they'll end up toast. If I were in their boots, I'd rather be open enemies than owe him one. He rested an arrow-tipped whistle on the table by his side, already plotting just how he might take advantage of the incoming power struggle. The real fun, he thought, was only just beginning. Kassadin's arrival had the weight of a god's intervention, and everyone suspected he was up to something big. But Yondu didn't care about cosmic schemes. He was here to collect his share, and preferred that no one else interfered. I'm more than capable of handling this, he said. No need for him to step in. Star-Lord watched with a mix of curiosity and caution. They'd lost any chance of hiding now. Once Kassadin tracked them down, there'd be no escape. I just wonder how the Kree will react, he murmured. Xandar and the Kree Empire are two of the galaxy's heavy hitters, Yondu agreed. Star-Lord shrugged, unconcerned. Let them duke it out. We'll stay back, keep an eye on things, and maybe we'll score some easy credits while everyone's distracted. Yondu laughed. The more chaotic the galaxy became, the better conditions were for bounty hunters like them. Chaos bred hatred, and hatred was good for business. Meanwhile, on a planet scarred by shattered armaments and twisted debris, a silent testament to a fierce battle, a burly figure in bata, red war armor sat on a crumbling throne. His purple skin gleamed in the dim light as he surveyed the ruin around him, every bit the warlord surveying his fallen domain. Damien's dark eyes flickered as he absorbed the latest reports streaming across the galaxy's communication network. The name Kassadin was on every world's lips. Renowned for his recent exploits, he was already a legend, but it was his use of void magic and the mystery of his home planet, Blue Star, that drew the most attention. Blue Star was no ordinary world. It lay within one of the 9 realms ruled by Odin, the God King whose authority stretched across countless systems. 2 mighty deities guarded that realm, among them the famed supreme mage Gu Yi, whose command of cosmic sorcery was said to be unrivaled. With such protectors in place, few beings dared to trespass. Yet Thanos moved with calculated patience. He knew the true power of the Infinity Stones remained secret to almost everyone in the universe. As long as Kassadin did not threaten his grand design, the Titan would leave him be. But if the Void God ever stood against the balance Thanos intended to impose, he would personally end Kassadin's existence. No hesitation, no mercy. After all, Thanos believed the universe's survival depended on his vision of order and resource equilibrium, and no one, not even a god of the Void, could derail that plan. Asgard. Allfather Odin had just learned that Kassadin, whose exploits against galactic disasters had made him something of a legend, was now claiming followers under the banner of a new void cult. Yet Odin barely raised an eyebrow. He'd lived through countless ages and seen countless movements flare up only to collapse within years. Building a true power, he knew, takes far more than a charismatic leader and a handful of disciples. Even if Kassadin poured every ounce of his will into this enterprise, centuries, or even millennia, would be needed before it could rival the great orders of old. A motley crew of recruits does not an empire make. Real strength is forged in the crucible of time, traditions woven into each generation, an unbroken lineage of leaders and lieutenants, clear hierarchies and responsibilities, and, most crucially, unyielding loyalty. Only then does a fledgling force coalesce into something formidable. Yes, Kassadin was generous, welcoming anyone who sought a place at his side. And Gwangna Sage, too, was eager to use the world of Xandar as a springboard for greater ambitions. But to Odin's experienced eye, they remained nothing more than grains of sand, bound to slip through their fingers long before they could cement a legacy. Could you please provide the chapter text you'd like me to rewrite? Once I have the full content, I'll polish it into smooth, idiomatic English, rename Harvey to Damien, male, and ensure the narrative flows naturally. Chapter 1 and 2, Waiting and Joining. On the planet Mowgli, Damien, a tall, powerfully built man with fiery red hair, stood in the dim glow of his calm crystal. The message scrolling across its surface made his heart quicken. The Void Cult has been formally established on Xandar by Lord Kassadin himself. Damien's emerald eyes shone with reverence. 5 months had passed since Kassadin's envoy, Mr. Kassadin, had come bearing the God of the Void's blessing. Since that day, Damien's youthful appearance had been miraculously restored, and his strength now far exceeded even his prime. He owed every ounce of his renewed power to Kassadin, and his faith burned brighter than ever. Orb Mowgli, ruler of this remote world, had stipulated a full year of observation before permitting any large-scale propagation of the Void teachings. Damien had never doubted he would meet that test. But when Kassadin himself proclaimed the founding of the Temple of the Void on Xandar, and broadcast the call to all believers across the galaxy, the moment for waiting was over. As one of Kassadin's devoted followers, Damien could not ignore the summons. He closed his fist around the crystal, determination surging through him. To delay would be to risk losing the chance to kneel before the God of the Void in person. Within moments, Damien dispatched his reply and prepared to depart. The stars themselves seemed to beckon him onward. Xandar awaited, and with it, the beginning of his greatest endeavor. Damien didn't want to witness Lord Kassadin rallying the scattered Void cultists across the galaxy, only to have them arrive too late and far too weak to serve him. Bowing low before the temple's black stone idol, he intoned with solemn devotion, "Great God of the Void, Kassadin, your disciple Lix shall never fail you." Rising to his feet, Damien retrieved his communicator and sent an urgent dispatch to the king. "Your Majesty," he urged, "the time has come to spread the teachings of the Void. Let all the people of Mowgli receive his gift and join in our glorious evolution." Across the stars, anyone with a reliable network link had caught wind of this proclamation. Though they admired Kassadin's fabled power, most dismissed the idea as too fantastical to be true. They were convinced that genuine entry into the Void God's fold would demand a steep price, and so they chose to wait, watching closely. One thing, however, was now certain. The locus of Kassadin's power had finally been uncovered. It takes a bold soul to advertise one's power base so openly. Of course, no one doubts Kassadin's strength. He is, after all, the God of the Void, but I'll let others take center stage for now. A few days later, Renoli, Kyle, Predictor, and Lacey, the first among us to step forward and swear themselves to the Void cult, knelt before the towering statue at the temple's heart. Their breaths came in shallow, reverent gasps, hearts pounding with gratitude, awe, and a hint of fear. "You have been blessed by Lord Kassadin himself, the God of the Void," Sonia intoned, her voice echoing in the hallowed chamber. "Now I will explain the powers you will receive upon fully embracing the Void's blessing." Standing a few meters behind the kneeling acolytes, Sonia's expression was calm but commanding. She raised one hand in a gesture of solemn welcome. "First, let me congratulate each of you. From this moment on, provided you avoid any life-threatening danger, You will live for centuries, perhaps even millennia. Sonia's voice was as musical as ever, yet her words struck Renoli and the other initiates like a crashing wave. They had expected to gain power by pledging themselves to the Void Cult, but never imagined they could actually rewrite the length of their lives. Across the galaxy, advanced civilizations have long pushed the boundaries of longevity. On Xandar, for example, the oldest citizens top out around 3 centuries, and most live no more than 200 years. Even so, those gains have limits. To hear that worshipping the void could extend one's life, span beyond any known technological horizon, was astonishing. If word of this miraculous benefit ever reached the major powers of Xandar, the political and corporate elite would be clamoring to join the Void Cult in droves. But for now, Sonia's revelation hung in the air like a promise and a warning that everything about life itself had just changed. Damien stood quietly as Sonia addressed the gathered initiates. "Right now, you may not feel much stronger," she began, her voice calm, "but that's perfectly normal. By receiving the Void's blessing, you've already committed yourselves to a glorious evolution. In time, you'll absorb all kinds of energies to evolve again and again, growing ever more powerful." She paused, letting every word sink in. "I trust you now understand the true meaning behind the commandments. Obey them, and you will prosper. Defy them, and you will find yourself called before the trial hall, where Lord Cassidon himself judges all who stray." Sonia's body trembled ever so slightly, betraying the sincerity behind her smile. She gave a final earnest warning. "Remember, the great Lord Cassidon watches your actions at every moment." Only now did Sonia fully grasp why Cassidon so freely shared the Void's power. It seemed effortless, costless even, but everyone who accepted it paid a hidden price, the hunger of the Void itself. To survive, you had to resist that hunger, to feel the intoxicating surge of power without ever losing yourself. Those who succeeded would not only live longer, they would ascend to heights beyond imagining. Damien's heart pounded as Sonia's parting warning echoed in his mind. If you, having only just joined, descend into a mindless hunger, you will be judged, whether you live 100 years or 1,000. He bowed respectfully. Thank you, Miss Sonia. We will remember the commandments of the Void God cult. Alongside him, Renoli, Predictor, and Lacey all inclined their heads in unison. Sonia offered them a kindly smile. The great Lord Cassidon imposes no shackles on your freedom, she said. However, he has arranged a gravity chamber for your training. Feel free to stay on the island as long as you wish, so that you might master your powers and learn to govern your desires. As for sustenance, you have 2 options. Purchase provisions from the island's chef, or submit a salvage application and recover your own food from the sea. Should you opt to salvage, the island's bureaucracy awaits you, so plan accordingly. Now that you are members of the Void Cult, Lord Cassidon looks forward to seeing you remain clear-headed and in full command of yourselves, today and always. With that, Sonia offered a final nod and departed. Though the first wave of recruits had arrived almost immediately, days slipped by without a second batch. Damien stood on the shore, watching the empty horizon, wondering who, if anyone, would come next. Sonia knew the world beyond was still watching the affairs of the Void God faith. Once Renaud and the others returned safely, everyone would see that believing in the Void truly yields power. Inevitably, more and more people would flock here, hoping to bolster their strength through faith, and Sonia would be busier than ever. Still, this kind of busyness was a welcome relief compared to her old job at that celebrity hotel. She smiled to herself, satisfied, and slipped away. The moment her footsteps faded, Renali, Kyle, the Predictor, and Lacey rose from their single-knee bows. They exchanged looks of wonder, each silently sharing the thrill of what lay ahead. Update 4. Chapter 103, The Price of a Meal. I told you this was our chance, Kyle said, his grin bright with excitement. I've been stuck at a plateau for ages, and as I've gotten older, I was only getting weaker. He shook his head in disbelief. I never imagined I'd break through again. Renaud's smile mirrored Kyle's. Ever since I lost sight of Damien in my visions, I knew his power was beyond anything I could fathom. I just didn't realize how limited my own perception was. No wonder I couldn't sense such a colossal presence. The prophet's eyes glistened with emotion as he placed a hand over his heart. Infinite evolution, until you wield the power to reshape your very destiny. Lacey clenched her fists, her pulse racing. It still feels unreal. Damien's strength alone is incomparable. His body is like a living galaxy. When he speaks, there's no question of doubt. Kyle turned to Lacey, pride shining on his face, and held out his hand. Congratulations, Lacey. You've received a blessing, too. From this moment forward, we all belong to the Void Cult, and I'll be relying on your guidance. With that, Kyle clasped her hand warmly, sealing their newfound bond. Among the 4 new devotees, Lacey was the only commoner, no special talent or lineage to call her own, so she clung to the Void's promise with a fervor nobody could match. The other 3, Kyle, Renoli, and Sonia, knew that Damien and his friends had already pledged themselves to the Void, so they remained on the island for days, refusing to leave, each dawn spent devising fresh ways to prove their devotion. On the 4th morning, something extraordinary happened. All 4 received the Void's blessing at once. The air shimmered, and before them materialized the great entity they had yearned to see. As the vision faded, Miss Sonia stepped forward, her eyes bright with awe. "Thank you all," she breathed, voice trembling with gratitude. Kyle was the first to move. He extended a hand in solemn greeting. Lacey's face lit up, and she mirrored his gesture. "Congratulations and welcome," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You've joined the Void Cult. You're one of us now." At that moment, Damien and his fellow initiates returned to the island, finishing their work elsewhere at dawn's first light. They paused at the edge of the grove, catching the last of Sonia's words. The newcomers turned, startled, as Damien stepped forward, a broad grin spreading across his face. "Damien!" Lacey exclaimed, her devotion plain in her bright eyes. "I know you. You're one of the first to join the Void." Renoli puffed up proudly at Damien's approach. "Since you're our senior in this path," she declared, "why don't you share a bit of your experience with us? In return, dinner's on me." Damien laughed, nodding. "It's a deal," he said, stepping fully into the clearing. Around them, the morning light glinted on rune-inscribed stones as 5 new void-bearers prepared to share tales of faith, power, and the mysteries still to come. "This is your promise, no backing out." When Damien heard that Renoli was insisting on treating the group, he paused, counting heads in the makeshift mess hall and sending a quick, wary look toward Sonia. Life since joining the Void had improved, but only barely. Every credit still seemed to vanish into food supplies. "I'm talking about dinner," Damien said with a casual shrug. "I can afford it. No need to feel guilty." Renoli's grin widened as he waved a dismissive hand. "Come on, Damien. Who doesn't appreciate the value of a level 2 bounty hunter's generosity?" Damien studied Renoli's confident expression and sighed inwardly. There was no talking him out of it now. With a final nod, Damien led the others toward the island's kitchen, their laughter and light chatter echoing across the wooden platform. In the past few days, they'd heard that a cadre of new chefs had been hired, news that tempted them dearly. But without explicit permission, they'd never dared step inside. They'd been content to catch fish and cook their own meals. Now, with Miss Sonia's blessing on the table, a proper feast awaited, and none of them planned to miss it. During the walk to the restaurant, Damien recounted every stage of his evolution, each change in his body and mind since joining their ranks. Time slipped away, and before they knew it, 2 hours had passed in engrossing conversation. By the time they were seated, Kyle, Predictor, Lacey, and Damien had worked up prodigious appetites, and Renoli was already uneasy. When Renoli picked up the check, his jaw dropped. One meal, $180,000. He braced himself against the table to keep from toppling backward. He knew island restaurants were usually modestly priced, just the cost of ingredients plus a small preparation fee, easily affordable for most patrons. But these 4 could each eat the equivalent of dozens, even hundreds of typical servings. No wonder Damien had warned Renoli he might regret inviting them to dinner. Still, once the feast settled in, Renoli felt every calorie convert into pure energy, flooding his body with strength. The most astonishing transformation, however, was in Lacey. Almost immediately after the meal, she looked years younger, her features softened, her posture more confident. She flexed an arm, feeling raw power coursing through her veins, and her eyes sparkled with excitement for the future. Under the broad canopy of the old oak, the 5 of them, Damien, Lacey, Renoli, Kyle, and the Prophet lingered over the dregs of wine and the last scraps of bread. Lacey sat with her back against the trunk, legs folded to one side. Her confidence lent a quiet radiance to her features. Renoli leaned forward, brushing a stray leaf from her sleeve. Damien, you said you joined this order more than a month ago. Does that make you the first recruit? Damien took a slow sip of wine and shook his head. I arrived before most of you, but I wasn't the very first. What about Sonia? Kyle asked, arching an eyebrow. She must have signed on before you did. Damien smiled. Exactly, Miss Sonia came first. At the mention of her name, Kyle's admiration was plain to see. I have to admit, he murmured, she's extraordinarily beautiful. The Prophet shot Kyle a sharp look. Save your praise, Kyle, he whispered. This is no place for idle flirting. Remember your manners and your duties. Kyle flushed but held his ground. I was simply acknowledging talent and poise, he said. Nothing more. Damien nodded. Sonia honed herself under Lord Cassidy's roof. She served as his housekeeper, learned grace and discretion that money can't buy. True refinement takes time. Kyle cleared his throat, straightening his back. Of course, I meant no disrespect. Silence fell for a moment, broken only by the rustle of leaves overhead. In that quiet hour, the five of them sat as equals, bound by their shared cause, and by the unspoken understanding that beauty, like courage, was a force not to be underestimated. Just remember this, Kyle, Master Cassadin said, his gaze sharp. If you ever stop worrying about Miss Sonia, you could end up dead. Kyle gave him a resolute nod. Understood. Master Cassadin smiled faintly. By the way, if you're curious about her past, Miss Sonia used to work at one of Xandar's celebrity hotels. Damien's eyebrows shot up. A celebrity hotel? Cassadin chuckled. Of course, only the most beautiful women ever get hired there. Kyle looked genuinely surprised. Master Cassadin, you're incredible. You actually went straight to a celebrity hotel to recruit her. Having lived on Xandar for some time, Kyle was well aware of those exclusive establishments. As a level 2 bounty hunter with a healthy bankroll, he'd once splurged on a 10-day stay. Even with abundant credits, he'd found himself drained by the hotel's temptations, until he finally admitted they were more than just a place to rest. Damien surveyed the exclusive island retreat with a wry smile. 10,000 credits a night. Only a billionaire would linger in a place like this. He certainly qualified. But even with all that wealth, he wasn't about to get caught up in rumors about Miss Sonia's true identity. Enough speculation, the seer, known to most as the predictor, said, raising a hand. Let's focus on mastering our abilities. When new recruits arrive, we want to be the veterans they look up to, not a bunch of gossip mongers. Damien stretched out his arms. Can't very well boast about my power if I don't even know what it is yet. They fell into a jog along the island's jagged shoreline. With every loop, each member of the group tested their limits. Subtle shifts of telekinesis, sparks of energy pulsing along their skin. The sun sank low, painting the sky in bruised purples and fiery oranges, and still they ran, pushing themselves until their muscles burned and their senses sharpened. By the time the last light vanished, everyone had found new control over their gifts and a newfound respect for one another. Tomorrow, they would tackle even tougher exercises. But tonight, under the stars, they had taken their first real steps toward greatness. Fifth update, Chapter 104, Genuine Wisdom. Damien stood in the great hall of the villa, eyes fixed on the holographic display of his void energy reserves. Renali and Kyle had each contributed an extra 10,000 units, small compared to Tony's infusion, but still the second largest increase he'd ever overseen. Satisfied, he pocketed his datapad and stepped outside, where Sonia was finishing her morning workout. Sonia, he said, his tone steady. I'm leaving for a while. Exactly how long I can't say. Here. He handed her a slim, glowing comm beacon. This is my personal signal. If anything happens, or you need me, activate it, and I'll respond as soon as I can. Sonia paused mid-stretch, the uncertainty in his words flickering across her face for a heartbeat. Then she squared her shoulders and returned his gaze. Understood, Mr. Cassadin. And if any new visitors arrive, if there's any unusual activity, I'll report straight back to you. She spoke with perfect composure, but Damien caught the brief tension around her eyes. She managed a quick, reassuring smile, then resumed her exercises as if nothing had changed. Damien allowed himself a faint smile in return. She wouldn't be coming with him, but at least now they were connected. No more sudden disappearances without a trace. With that thought, he turned and strode back into the villa. After all, genuine wisdom wasn't just about amassing power. It was about knowing which bonds were worth preserving, no matter how far you ventured into the unknown. Although she wouldn't be gone long, Sonia's posture had gone a little rigid just then, and Damien noticed. "Don't worry," he said at once. "I understand. I'll be careful, Mr. Cassidin." Sonia smiled to reassure him. She knew better than to pry. Her position forbade it, and she also understood that Cassidin preferred to make his own decisions without interference. "Once the new arrivals have settled in, watch them for 4 days," she instructed. "If they show no signs of rebellion or impatience during that time, send word to me immediately." "I will." Damien bowed. "And while I'm away, feel free to eat any of the food my chef has prepared." Sonia's tone softened. "You still haven't regained all your strength. Guests might wonder why I'm holding back, what I'd do if you overindulged, but it won't do you any harm. In fact, I hope you'll take charge of your own affairs soon enough." "Thank you," Damien replied, conceding with a nod. Without another word, he turned and descended to the underground level. There, he retrieved the gravity device, his most important piece of equipment, and made his way back to Sonia, ready to set their plan in motion. Before Sonia's eyes, Mr. Cassidin took a single step and disappeared. Once she realized he was gone, Sonia's eyes flickered with resolve. She knew she was too weak to voice her true feelings, but time was on her side. If she preserved her current relationship with him and let her inner strength grow, one day she would no longer be too weak in Mr. Cassidin's eyes. Until that day came, she would suppress any lingering thoughts of him and focus instead on governing the island and forging her own power, one steady step at a time. In the blink of an eye, Damien departed Xandar, flickered across the lunar surface, and reappeared on Earth's blue star. Though it was night on Xandar, the sun still shone high overhead back home. After months away, Damien had finally returned. His phone buzzed relentlessly. Tony had flooded him with messages, and an alert announced that $800 million had landed in his account, a generous dividend from Tony, no doubt. But for Damien, money was the least of his concerns. Damien scrolled through the messages Tony had sent. Almost everyone detailed Tony's latest breakthroughs with cosmic communicators and cosmic translators. In his messages, Tony sounded positively electrified by these alien technologies. A month ago, he'd announced a successful prototype, and by Damien's reckoning, in just over 2 months, Tony had mastered 2 of the universe's most widely used extraterrestrial devices. That level of talent was unheard of, and it sparked some exciting ideas in Damien's mind. He'd need to run them past Tony in person, though. After changing into fresh clothes, Damien tapped his phone's hollow interface and placed the call. It connected in under 5 seconds. Instead of a grainy video feed, a crisp holographic projection shimmered into being before him, proof that Tony had already upgraded Damien's phone system. "Damien, back from your trip?" Tony's voice crackled with excitement. "Just saw your message," Damien replied, leaning forward. "What's up?" Tony's projection solidified into the corner of Damien's living room. He was wearing a perfectly tailored suit and sported a triumphant grin. "Wait until you hear about the communicator I just finished calibrating." A thrill ran through Damien. Between Tony's genius and these alien technologies, they were on the brink of something extraordinary. Chapter 7. "Honestly, I never expected you to master those 2 technologies so quickly," Damien said with a wry smile as he studied Tony's holographic projection. "Your mind really is the real deal," Tony replied, accepting the praise with a modest nod. "But let's not forget, none of this would have been possible without Jarvis." "My mind may be sharp, but Jarvis deserves every bit of the credit," Damien admitted with a chuckle. Tony clasped his hands together. "Come by my place, and we'll go through everything in detail. I've completed the initial research, but I haven't pushed these tech innovations into production yet." Damien leaned back in his chair. "I'd like to keep it under wraps for now. Give me time to decide whether or when we roll it out on a global scale." "Perfect," Tony said, snapping his fingers. In the blink of an eye, Damien found himself aloft above the New York skyline. Within seconds, They touched down at Tony Stark's sleek waterfront manor. The front doors slid open before Damien even reached them. "Welcome back, Mr. Damien," Jarvis's smooth voice greeted him. "It's been too long. You're looking sharper than ever." Damien smiled. "All thanks to that alien alloy you retrieved for me. The upgrades have been phenomenal." "As you'll see," Jarvis replied, "Mr. Stark is eager to demonstrate what we've achieved. Right this way, please." Cameras tracked their every step as they entered Tony's state-of-the-art laboratory. Rows of workbenches glowed with holographic interfaces, advanced drones hummed in suspended animation, and the air crackled with potential. Damien took it all in, curiosity and anticipation welling up inside him. The real test, how far this new technology could go, was about to begin. "Tony Stark has made further improvements to me," Jarvis announced as Damien stepped into the Stark lobby. The AI's tone held a note of human-like enthusiasm. Thanks to the exotic materials Damien had recovered on his last mission, Stark had refined the alloy plating on his suit and integrated the cosmic communicator Damien retrieved from deep space. The result was a dramatic upgrade. Jarvis's signal range now spanned continents, his processing power had skyrocketed, and his overall intelligence had reached new heights. Damien paused, frowning slightly. An AI that clever, was that truly a blessing? Under Stark's vigilant control, Jarvis remained a powerful ally, but if his cognition ever slipped beyond its safety protocols, the consequences could be dire. Damien chewed his lip, debating whether to voice his concerns. Best to speak with Tony face-to-face before raising any alarms. Before he could gather his thoughts, a blur shot up from the underground workshop. The newly retrofitted armor, its flight jets humming, raced into the lobby at breakneck speed. Yet its thrust was flawlessly regulated. There were no rogue sparks, no unexpected surges. In an instant, it decelerated and came to rest precisely 2 meters in front of Damien, awaiting Stark's next command. 6th update. When Damien stepped into Tony's lab, Tony glanced up from a scatter of schematics and datapads and broke into a grin. "Hey, want to go over my latest research together?" he asked, pushing a holographic display toward Damien. Damien remembered how effortlessly Tony had controlled his power just moments ago. Impressed and curious, he nodded without a second thought. "Absolutely," he replied. Tony's smile grew broader as he tapped the display to bring up charts, diagrams, and experimental logs. Side by side, they leaned in, the soft hum of lab equipment underscoring the start of another deep dive into Tony's groundbreaking work. Chapter 105, People Cursed by Knowledge. "That cosmic communicator you brought back last time is a game-changer," Tony said as he and Damien descended into the subterranean lab. "You've boosted Jarvis's transmission speed to new heights. Now, no matter where I am on Blue Star, I can beam the armor right to me." Damien leaned on the stainless steel railing and smiled. "Exactly. You can have Jarvis send you the suit components remotely. I only regret not getting your communicator address sooner. Would have saved us a ton of trips." Tony grinned. "You have a comlink, right? I can swap addresses with you if you like." Damien tapped the wrist display on his right arm. A holographic interface flickered to life. "Here it is. But where exactly are you in the cosmos at the moment? If you're too far from Blue Star, the signal could weaken. I've accounted for it in my design, but materials can only stretch so far." Tony reached over and lifted the sleek black communicator Damien had set on a bench. Its surface reflected the lab lights, each edge perfectly machined. "Let's stick with this one," he said, tapping its side. The screen lit up instantly. "It's been rock solid so far. Now, here's mine. Add it, and we'll be in constant touch." Damien nodded, entering the new address into his own device. "Done. From now on, whether you're orbiting Mercury or halfway across the galaxy, I'll know where you are, and so will JIS." Tony pocketed the communicator with a wink. "Perfect. Now, shall we get back to work?" Damien felt a surge of confidence, but he reminded himself that the cosmic communicator he'd helped reverse engineer was the pinnacle of alien technology. The gulf between Blue Star's tech and the originals was still immense. In just a few months, they'd managed to reproduce several working prototypes, an impressive feat, yet fully closing the gap, let alone improving on it, in that time frame was out of the question. Still, the devices would serve their purpose just fine. A few swift taps on his console, and Damien linked his system to Tony's cosmic communicator. A soft chime confirmed the connection, and Tony's avatar materialized on the holo screen. "Damien," Tony said, leaning closer, "I wanted to get your opinion on something." "Yes?" Damien prompted. Tony studied him for a moment, then dove in. "This communicator we've sketched out, alien-grade tech, obviously. If we roll it out commercially, the profits could be astronomical. Beyond that, it'd spark leaps in every tech sector on Blue Star. Should we launch it?" Damien considered the question, then nodded. He was about to reply when he noticed Tony's brow flicker. On Tony's display, instead of Damien, the incoming signal was labeled Cassidon. For a heartbeat, Tony looked startled. Then he cleared his throat and moved on to another topic, as if nothing unusual had happened. Damien simply smiled and refocused on the discussion. The future, he decided, was worth whatever mysteries lay beneath the surface. Damien keyed in the final command: "Activate the Cosmic Translator." Tony held up a hand. "Hang on. Unless Blue Star intends to broadcast to the entire galaxy right now, it's probably wiser to keep it offline." With the signal exchange complete, Damien eased into a chair. "We're not under the protection of God King Odin or the Supreme Mage. Without their shields, any alien power could see us as an easy target." Tony frowned, brow knitting as he weighed Damien's warning. "You really think someone out there is bold enough to pick a fight with us?" Tony leaned forward, eyes alight with ambition. "Damien, you know my goal, to drive Blue Star's technological advancement so humanity can finally wield the power to defend itself." Damien nodded, though concern flickered across his face. "I understand your vision, Tony, but you must also recognize the risk. Once we deploy cosmic communicators on a global scale, we'll be broadcasting our presence to every corner of the galaxy." Tony's expression hardened. "So what? We're ready to meet other civilizations. Their willingness to visit Blue Star will only increase." "But that signal," Damien said quietly, "once it's out there, you can't reel it back in. And though Odin and the Ancient One protect us, they're not immortal. Their defenses won't last forever." Tony opened his mouth, but Damien held up a hand. "Tell me this, can you guarantee Blue Star's technology will advance from where it stands now to a fully interstellar society in just a few decades, fast enough to stand on equal footing with alien civilizations that have been exploring the stars for centuries?" Tony forced a wry smile. Blue Star's progress had indeed been astonishing, yet Damien's caution was justified. After a moment, he admitted, "I'd love to promise you 10 years, but given the resources, scarce in some areas, untested in others, it's simply not realistic." Damien allowed himself a small, relieved nod. Tony studied him for a long moment, the spark of determination still dancing in his eyes, before he exhaled and let the conversation and the fate of Blue Star hang in the balance. It took barely a century for humanity to progress from the steam age to our current modern world. In just over 100 years, science and technology have advanced at a breathtaking pace, each breakthrough standing on the shoulders of countless geniuses and the relentless efforts of ordinary people. For an individual, a century can span several lifetimes. For a civilization, it's little more than a warm-up. Tony had learned from the books Damien brought back that many alien societies don't formally engage with other worlds until they've mastered interstellar travel. By comparison, Earth, Blue Star, can at best send rockets and satellites to survey its nearest neighbors. We're still far from the day when humanity sets foot on another star's planets. That realization drove Tony to reverse engineer a rudimentary cosmic communicator. He'd built a low-end prototype, but held off on publishing the design. First, he wanted to run it by Damien. Deep down, Tony felt something like relief. Earth's technology was unlikely to catch up to the galactic community anytime soon, and this small head start might buy them the time they needed. In truth, there are only two great figures on Blue Star who can buy humanity the precious time it needs: the Supreme Mage, known as the Ancient One, and God King Odin. Damien didn't say exactly how many years they have left, but Tony estimates it's no more than a few decades. Within that window, it's doubtful we'll recover enough truly rare materials from across the universe to match what Blue Star lacks. And even if Damien succeeds in bringing them back, turning alien resources into usable technology will still take years of research and development. We certainly can't close that gap overnight. Damien saw the worry etched on Tony's face and offered him a gentle smile. Tony, you don't need to be so anxious. I know you're driven to connect with the cosmos, to absorb every scrap of knowledge from other civilizations, so you can invent wonders for humanity. But rushing ahead won't help. So long as we avoid major accidents or dying in battle, we'll have plenty of time. You're young, and you'll live a long life. Take your work one step at a time. I have plenty of time, Damien said slowly, but Blue Star and humanity might not. Tony folded his arms across his chest, resting a hand on his chin as he studied Damien with a tangled frown. Ever since Damien had delivered the alien technology, Tony's days had settled into an unforgiving routine. He reserved 3 hours every morning for exercise, took only brief meals, and after midnight allowed himself a little time with Pepper. The rest of his waking hours were spent locked away in the lab. Fortunately, Tony's decision to join the Void had saved him from total collapse. Without access to their recovery protocols, he would have long since crumbled under months of surviving on 4 or even 2 hours of sleep a night. Damien watched him and understood all too well the curse of a mind that can never rest. The more I discovered, the deeper his anxieties ran. Was there firepower enough? What other threats lay hidden? Each new question only spawned another. Damien knew there was only one way to free Tony from that torment, by answering his fears once and for all. Until then, no amount of gentle reassurance would coax Tony into slowing down, indulging his old hobbies, or simply letting himself unwind. Damien smiled to himself. The more unpredictable Tony acted, the easier his own plan would be to carry out, but he knew this wasn't the moment to spring it. He settled back in his chair. Patience will deliver everything you need. Let's drop it for now. Tony, sensing a shift in the air, changed the subject. All right, how's the new steel armor coming along? Damien met his gaze. I've been analyzing the materials you brought me for over 2 months. It turns out they're far better suited to enhancing the suit's onboard AI than to boosting its raw strength or hardness. Tony frowned in mild surprise. So what does that mean in practice? Physically, the armor's specs have only improved marginally, Damien explained. But the AI core, Jarvis, is operating on a whole new level. He processes and executes commands faster and more accurately than ever. Tony let out a relieved chuckle. That's exactly what we need. With Jarvis at peak performance, this suit will be unstoppable. Damien nodded, folding his hands. He'd learned to keep his real agenda close to the vest. The pieces were falling into place, and when the time came, nothing would stand in his way. Chapter 106, A Request. You've put strict limits on your AI, right? Damien asked, meeting Tony Stark's gaze. Tony, brilliant, unpredictable, and the very man who'd unleashed Ultron, looked up from his workbench. The Avengers weren't fully assembled yet, and Stark tended to roam the cosmos at a moment's notice. If he accidentally gave rise to another Ultron-level threat, even a narrowly averted Omnic crisis would cost countless lives. Why would I be uncertain about my own creations? Tony replied with a cocky grin. Damien held his ground. I'm talking about deep, unbreakable safeguards in Jarvis's code, something that prevents him from ever going rogue. Tony waved a hand dismissively. Relax. I've embedded multiple layers of failsafes. Jarvis will follow my commands exactly. No surprises. Confidence is good, Damien said, but unchecked ambition has a way of rewriting the rules. You've seen the movies. Once an Omnic crisis ignites, even if we stop it quickly, the devastation is inevitable. Tony's grin faded at the mention of another Omnic crisis. For a moment, his expression turned sober. Then he nodded slowly. Point taken. I'll double-check every safeguard. Damien watched Tony in silence, noting the deep lines of thought etched across his friend's face. He didn't press him further. He merely needed to prod Tony's memory. After all, Tony's motives were obvious. He'd built Ultron because his frail human body simply couldn't keep pace with the frontline dangers he faced. Year after year of combat had chipped away at his strength and stamina. He needed an army of obedient machines to bear the brunt of battle. But everything had shifted now that Tony had embraced the Void. He was convinced that, as this mysterious force continued to fuse with his biology, his natural form would one day outmatch even the most advanced suit of armor. It was only a matter of time. Still, Damien recognized a looming vulnerability. If someone ever ripped that steel shell away, Tony would face real fear for the first time in his life. That possibility made Damien all the more eager for Tony's next encounter with Captain America. He wondered how Steve Rogers would react when he discovered just how powerful Tony had become beneath the iron facade. Checking his calculations, Damien realized Steve would awaken in roughly a year's time. If Damien's timing was right, that reunion would be proof enough. He wouldn't have to convince Captain America of Tony's transformation. The truth would speak for itself. Once Captain America had seen both the modern world and the Void's power, he would only have come looking for Damien if he hungered for more strength. In fact, Steve Rogers never sought him out, and Damien never approached him. The reason was simple. After standing before the Void's overwhelming might, Steve emerged unshaken in his convictions. He felt no desire for its power, and no argument could have tempted him. Steve Rogers isn't like Tony Stark. When Steve first met Tony, the younger man was still essentially ordinary, albeit an extraordinarily gifted inventor, who'd only just begun to glimpse the wider world. Sure, Tony had a brilliant mind and boundless wealth, advantages that most people can only dream of, but those weren't what truly defined him. He remained a genius tinkerer and a privileged industrialist burdened by his own doubts. So when he learned the Void could grant Pepper added protection, he embraced the chance without hesitation. Captain America, by contrast, is a man out of his own time, his instincts and values still firmly rooted in the 1940s. He doesn't share Tony's hunger for more years to hone his gifts. What he craves above all is an end to his unending existence. In today's world, the woman he loved is gone, and nearly everyone he ever knew has slipped through his fingers. His only surviving companion is Bucky Barnes, the Winter Soldier, and their history suggests even deeper complications lie ahead. Stripped of family, unburdened by long-term plans or grand ambitions, Steve Rogers finds immortality less a gift than a curse. For these reasons, Damien has no interest in pressing a romantic pursuit with him. Yet Steve's quiet longing for release gives Damien the assurance that should he extend an offer, Steve will accept. Watching Damien thoughtfully change the subject, Tony realized he had instinctively pulled back, though he lacked the willpower to govern his own impulses completely. Seizing on a more mundane query, he glanced across at Damien and asked, "By the way, Damien, what have you been doing out in the universe these past few months?" "It's nothing more than founding the Void Faith and gathering more believers," Damien explained. He'd planned to keep this to himself, but when Tony pressed for details, honesty felt easier than deception. "I've established the Void Faith," he said casually. "So, I'll have followers?" Tony's eyes brightened. His mind began racing. "Can I call them members?" Damien shrugged. "Whether they see themselves as your members is another matter. You know that once they embrace the Void, I won't bind them with rigid rules," Tony countered. Damien couldn't help but smile at Tony's eagerness. He understood exactly what Tony wanted, to marshal the Void Faith's strength to aid Blue Star at its most critical moment. He decided to temper that enthusiasm with a dose of reality. "They're free agents. They answer only to the Void." Tony leaned forward, excitement spreading across his face. "So if I become an ally to them, I can request their help?" "Exactly," Damien replied. "I'm not about to stop any of them from choosing to support Blue Star." Tony's triumphant grin confirmed Damien's suspicions. If the Void Faith was going to rally behind Blue Star, the quickest route was through Damien himself. Tony leaned back, studying Damien with a calculating gaze. "Look, I know how you feel about S-Healed, and American politicians aren't exactly your cup of tea either. From what I've seen, you'd never attack Blue Star unprovoked. But trusting you to defend it? That's another matter entirely." He paused, recalling their conversation from the 2017 crisis. "You told me back then that if things ever went south, humanity would stand shoulder to shoulder with alien allies. That implies a disaster of massive scale and plenty of chances to form new alliances, so if you think you can win them over, I won't stand in your way." Damien's eyes narrowed. Tony leaned forward, his tone turning cautionary. "Just remember, Blue Star isn't their home planet. Even if you bring them here, you can't be sure you'll always have the upper hand. Their interests won't always align with ours." He let the warning hang in the air. That's not necessarily good news for Blue Star. A flicker of surprise crossed Damien's face. He'd been waiting for exactly this kind of push to get Tony's attention on interstellar diplomacy, but he hadn't expected Tony to volunteer the lead-off. Damien settled back, his expression cool and unreadable. "Point taken," he said softly, masking the spark of opportunity igniting behind his eyes. Damien nodded thoughtfully. "Of course I understand. But as long as they have ambitions, desires, you can win them over if you offer the right incentives." Tony grinned at Damien's unspoken approval and eased himself into the chair beside him. Ever since he'd joined the Void and unlocked those evolutionary abilities, he'd grown stronger than ever. But he'd never forgotten another facet of his identity. He was a genius scientist and one of the wealthiest men on Blue Star. Profit, after all, was one of his specialties. "True," Damien replied, his tone deliberate. "But the credits of Blue Star don't carry weight across the cosmos." "I'm well aware," Tony said, picking up on Damien's meaning. "Compared to the major powers out there, human civilization is still low tier. So we'll need to play by the currency systems of those more advanced civilizations," Damien concluded. Tony leaned forward, excitement shining in his eyes. "Exactly, and now that I have your war blessing, I have a proposition for how we proceed." Chapter 107. Damien's Vision and Ambitions. Damien had never thought this broadly when his world was a Blue Star. He'd built his reputation there as an inventor, pushing the limits of local materials and technology, yet always within the same environmental and logistical constraints. Everything changed, however, the moment he joined the Void. The organization granted him not only vastly extended years of life, but also unfettered access to alien blueprints and breakthroughs. In an instant, his ambitions outgrew the boundaries of a single planet. On Blue Star, the pace of research was throttled by scarce exotic resources and aging laboratories. No matter how ingenious his prototypes, he could only push so far before running up against the planet's limits. He realized that waiting for Blue Star to catch up, upgrading its entire industrial base, reshaping its ecology, leapfrogging straight into interstellar travel, would take centuries. Damien refused to be patient. He would simply leave Blue Star behind. Armed with his reinforced steel armor, a universal translator keyed to any galactic dialect, and a subspace communicator capable of bridging light years in real time, Damien felt unstoppable. He planned to trace trade routes into uncharted systems, license alien inventions where he could, and apply their principles to new technologies back home, or sell them for a profit in distant markets. Out there in the Void, every star, every colony, every derelict space station might hold the missing piece for his next breakthrough. Confident in his suit's self-repair systems and the Void's network of contacts, Damien strode into the cosmos. He knew the road ahead would be perilous: pirate skirmishes, corporate sabotage, cosmic phenomena beyond any atlas, but the potential rewards were too great to ignore. Blue Star's future could wait. Damien's destiny lay among the stars. Damien listened quietly as Tony laid out his plan. On their own, neither of them could enter the universe directly, but with Damien's help, Tony could finally set his talents loose on an unimaginable scale. Tony leaned back, eyes bright with anticipation. "Pepper's on board with this, right?" Damien offered a small, amused smile. "Of course. It's always a pleasure talking things through with you." Tony raised an eyebrow. "You haven't filled her in on every last detail yet, have you?" Damien shook his head. "Not in depth, but convincing Pepper won't be hard. We all share the same beliefs about the Void, and we enjoy lifespans that stretch far beyond a human's. A short separation won't change her mind." Tony nodded. "Still, if you're off-world, away from Blue Star, don't you worry about what's happening there while you're gone?" Damien's expression turned confident. "Why would I? God King Odin still stands. The Ancient One still weaves her spells. If the sky ever threatened to collapse, you can be sure someone taller would be there to prop it up." He paused, then added with a grin, "Blue Star's in good hands." Tony allowed himself a relieved smile. "All right then, with your help, Damien will crack open the universe, and Pepper will see we did it for the right reasons. Let's get started." "It's precisely this chance that makes it the perfect moment for me to explore the stars," Tony said, as if he'd anticipated Damien's hesitation all along. "All right," Damien replied, "but if you really want to venture into the universe, We first need to secure Blue Star. Tony shrugged. When you want to come back, I expect you to stand on your own 2 feet. I'm not volunteering to be your personal pilot. Damien leaned back, considering. He knew that the Void Cult needed more than just recruits to expand rapidly. It needed funding. Bounty hunting had proven lucrative, almost a no-risk business for him. But if he wanted to raise capital quickly, nothing beat weapons manufacturing and cutting-edge inventions. That was why he'd kept an eye on Tony's workshop. The young genius had been turning out prototypes at a breathtaking pace. Originally, Damien had planned to convince Tony to join him on this cosmic journey. Now, he didn't have to. Before any persuasion could even begin, Tony himself was already toying with the idea of exploring the cosmos. It wasn't surprising. Tony Stark wasn't just a brilliant engineer. He was a mad scientist at heart, driven by an insatiable obsession to push technology further than anyone dared. Damien's voice was steady as he looked Tony in the eye. I promise I won't be a burden once I leave. I have no other way into that universe but to ask for your help. But when I return, you'll be the first person I come back to. Tony leaned back in his chair, tapping his fingertips together in a thoughtful rhythm. A slow smile spread across his face. You know as well as I do that the Void Divine Church is brand new and badly needs capital. If you're planning to develop anything, or turn a profit from your discoveries, I can front you the startup funding. And when your inventions start earning, we split it 40 to 60, 40% for me, 60 for you. Sound reasonable? Damien studied Tony for a moment, impressed by how thoroughly he'd anticipated every need. He inclined his head. It's generous and fair. Let's draw up the terms. With that, the two laid the foundations of a partnership that would bridge worlds. Tony shook his head with a wry smile. You don't need to haggle over a 40-60 or even a 50-50 split to make this work. Damien let out a relieved breath. Good. That saves us both time. And you still have to get me out into the universe. That's the only way I'll ever see the alien technologies I want to study. Oh, and fair warning. In the early days, I ended up dipping into some of the startup funds you gave me to cover a few expensive purchases. Tony nodded thoughtfully. He had no secrets from Damien. After all, the Void Cult had been strapped for cash when it was founded, and Damien had stepped in to help. Now that Tony was in a position to return the favor, he saw no reason to stall. He was tired of owing his friend and dreading the moment when he'd finally have to ask for help again. Once they broke free of Earth's gravity, Tony was confident he'd make enough credits in no time to outfit a battleship, or at the very least, buy a fighter and come back. It felt good for once to call the shots. Tony leaned back, weighing his options. If the plan failed, he could always borrow funds from Damien to acquire a starfighter outright. After all, with even a single space interceptor, traveling through the void and back to Blue Star would be effortless. Tony was confident that by 2025, just 8 years from 2017, Blue Star's civilization would undergo a rapid leap forward. Since merging with the Void, Tony had gained a lifespan exceeding a millennium and witnessed the wonders of countless interstellar societies. His ambitions had grown from national rivalries on Earth to the grand arc of human progress across the stars. He intended to leverage his inventions to spark a true cross-era revolution in Blue Star's technology, propelling it into the interstellar age and securing its place among the universe's advanced civilizations. Yet that future hinged on one vital condition. Blue Star had to survive the mysterious, powerful threat Damien had warned him about back in 2017. Time was short, and every second counted. Tony sighed, determined to seize every advantage. First, he murmured, I'll stay on Blue Star a little longer and recover. At that moment, the workshop door slid open. Damien strode in, carrying a slim, black case. He set it on the workbench and clicked it open to reveal a row of compact modules. I brought you the gravitonic stabilizers, he said. Mount them beneath the Mark-I's hull. They'll generate a localized gravity field for crew comfort and system stability during flight. Tony's eyes lit up. Perfect timing. With these, I can finish the prototype, and once it's flight-worthy, nothing will stand between Blue Star and the cosmos. He reached for the modules, heart racing. This was the first concrete step toward safeguarding his world's future, and ushering in a new era among the stars. You can use this time to study the device and to get to know Pepper, Tony said, folding his arms. Once you have her consent, I'll bring you both along on the universe mission. I don't want this journey to put any strain on your marriage. Damien nodded. Understood. Tony felt a surge of gratitude. Damien had risked everything to retrieve the gravity manipulator, and now, after hearing Tony's plan, he agreed without hesitation. That confidence had been crucial in persuading Pepper to enter the void. On all of Blue Star, only Damien, Tony, and Pepper had ever crossed its threshold. Tony and Pepper had grown inseparable since then, and he would never dream of treating her poorly. In fact, joining the void had only enhanced Pepper's vitality. Her skin glowed with an otherworldly smoothness, her body as supple and resilient as living steel. Time and again, her newfound abilities had unlocked doors to realms they had never imagined. But before they ventured beyond the known universe, Tony insisted on one more thing, a heart-to-heart with Pepper. He wasn't worried. He was confident they'd complete the round trip in less than a year. After all, a little time apart could make the heart grow fonder. Perhaps, he thought, this journey would bring them even closer. Chapter 108, The Starting Point for Catching Up with Cosmic Civilization. I'll pick these up for you, Damien said, and then you can figure out how to get Pepper on board. Tony gave a small, knowing smile. Sounds like a plan. With that, Damien vanished in a flash of blue light and reappeared moments later in Tony's lab, a stack of gravity manipulation devices in hand. Sophia had procured them all for him. I'm going to lay low at Blue Star Base for a bit, Damien announced, setting the strange contraptions down one by one. Let me know when you're ready to move on. Will do, Tony replied. As Damien waved and strode away, the doors hissed shut behind him. Left alone, Jarvis immediately began scanning the assortment of alien-looking gadgets. All devices have been scanned, sir, the AI reported. Tony crouched beside the boxes. We shouldn't fire any of these off in here, he said, nodding at Jarvis's readout. An unexpected gravitational surge could tear the lab apart. Agreed, Jarvis answered. However, studying gravity control is likely the key to interstellar warfare, or even faster-than-light travel. Tony's eyes lit up at the thought. He opened the final box. Inside lay a compact gravity well projector, its circuitry unfamiliar but elegant. His pulse quickened. This, he murmured, could be the breakthrough we've been looking for. He gently lifted the device as if cradling the future of cosmic civilization in his hands. You have to understand, humanity's technology still can't conquer gravity, which is why astronauts must meet such rigorous physical standards. If Damien could fully reverse engineer this gravity device, the rewards would be immense, and he desperately needs the money right now. More importantly, mastering and independently producing the device would let us relax those selection criteria, accelerating our exploration of space. On top of that, it's the essential component for a functional spacefighter. Damien has studied theoretical designs in books, but has never had the materials or expertise to build one himself. Now, with a working prototype in hand, all he needs to do is dissect it, learn its principles, and scale it down. He can start by fabricating a basic version from ordinary materials, improve it step by step through experimentation, and eventually create his own groundbreaking inventions. After all, real breakthroughs often come in a flash of inspiration, leading to innovations that leave everyone else scratching their heads. More inventions demand not only deep theoretical knowledge, but also a wealth of hands-on experience and the precise use of laboratory tools to bring them into being. By studying what already exists, we build our work on the shoulders of giants. Yet compared to the great civilizations scattered across the galaxy, humanity is still very much in its infancy. Alien breakthroughs could catapult Blue Star's technology forward in ways we can barely imagine. After handing the data drives over to Tony, Damien made his way back to his quarters. He sank into a hot bath, letting the tension of the day slide away. As the steam curled around him, he called out on autopilot, "Sonia, could you prepare afternoon tea for me?" Silence answered him. Halfway through the sentence, he blinked and realized where he was. Blue Star's orbital station, far from the old manor where Sonia had looked after his meals for the past 6 months. He was so used to her gentle presence that he'd spoken her name without thinking. Now, with only the hiss of the station's life support system, he was acutely aware of how much of home he'd left behind. Damien shrugged out of his golden armor, slipped into the locker room, and replaced it with a fresh set of casual clothes. He climbed into his car and headed straight for Chinatown, where he treated himself to his favorite dishes. Meanwhile, S.H.I.E.L.D. had already picked up on his return. Nick Fury quietly instructed every agent in the city to steer clear of the neighborhoods Damien was known to frequent. No one knew where he had been during his sudden 6-month disappearance, but everyone agreed on one point. Crossing paths with him was a risk they couldn't afford. Fury had methods for handling most powered threats, but Damien was different. A literal demon of terrifying strength, unbound by law or conscience. Their last encounter had ended only because Agent Coulson managed to calm the situation, and Tony Stark brokered a hasty truce. Nick Fury had no intention of repeating that gamble. If Damien showed any sign of unleashing havoc on Blue Star, Fury knew he'd need more firepower. Reluctantly, he reached for his secure line and placed a call to Captain Marvel. Damien pushed back his dessert plate and slid into the driver's seat. Ever since he'd set foot on Xandar, his mind had been racing with strategies to accelerate his power growth, and on Blue Star, he'd still been scheming to pull Tony into his universe. But now that that grand plan was behind him, he decided it was time to truly unwind. He spent the evening driving through New York City. Before long, several striking women had taken note of the handsome stranger behind the wheel. It had been ages since Damien let himself indulge in such diversions, but tonight he selected one companion whose age, appearance, and energy perfectly matched his own. He'd discovered on Xandar that their women shared many of Earth's defining beauties, each with her unique charm, and it was never hard to find company. Yet as Kassadin, he'd always held himself at arm's length, content merely to pass the time rather than dive into anything serious. Back on Blue Star, however, he'd reclaimed his true identity, a wealthy New York scion with no need for aliases or concealment. Free at last from cosmic obligations and interplanetary politics, he allowed himself to enjoy the evening fully. When Damien finally woke the next afternoon, sunlight filtering through plush hotel curtains, he felt a wave of contentment. To ensure their liaison remained just a pleasant memory, he transferred $2 million into his companion's account before slipping away. With that, he closed the chapter on fleeting romance and set his sights on whatever new adventures lay ahead. Damien cared little for money. With Stark Industries depositing $200 to $300 million into his account every month, even a lavish spending spree of $5 million a day wouldn't put a dent in his income. He refused to let romantic entanglements or anyone else dictate his mood or slow him down. So, for over 20 days straight, he indulged himself. Meals in exclusive restaurants, evenings in private lounges, and the company of beautiful companions who had no designs beyond the moment. It was the purest luxury of all, having so much that worry vanished. During this time, Sonia checked in frequently, and a steady stream of visitors arrived on the island, hoping to see him. Yet without solid information and barred from meeting him face-to-face, most guests lost interest within a few days. Only 8 remained convinced that the so-called void would stay put. Others went so far as to claim it was all a con, Kassadin's scheme to lure wealthy thrill-seekers into blowing money on nothing. Concerned by the rumors, Sonia asked Damien how best to handle the situation. He paused, weighing the fuss over an island spectacle he'd barely noticed himself, and then offered his verdict. His own brand of effortless ease would be the perfect antidote to gossip. Damien paid no mind to the rumors swirling around him. His sole focus was on gathering void energy, so he'd lowered his standards and opened the opportunity to anyone who truly desired it. What he needed most were a couple more hero templates. Once he secured them, he'd be confident enough to face even the most formidable foes. Still, Damien wasn't willing to hand out power recklessly. He had one non-negotiable requirement: patience. Anyone who wasn't prepared to wait, even for a few days, would inevitably let greed drive them to break the Void God's precepts once they acquired strength. Sure, enforcing those rules might seem like a minor chore, but in practice, a single lapse could sow chaos among the villagers and tempt other cult members to follow suit. Damien wasn't yet powerful enough to rewrite the laws of the universe, but he could certainly judge a person's character before granting them a share of the void's might. Only those who proved steadfast and self-controlled would earn a place by his side. Chapter 109. What I fear most is the silence. 24 days slipped by almost unnoticed. This morning, as Damien sat down to breakfast, his phone buzzed with an incoming call from Tony. He tapped the screen and put it on speaker. Solved? Tony's voice crackled through. Almost, Damien replied around a bite of toast. I finally convinced Pepper that I'll be back within a year. She agreed to the timeline. Are you all set to leave then? Give me 5 more minutes to finish my breakfast, Damien said with a grin. I don't know when I'll get another chance to eat like this. You're planning to cook for yourself out there? Tony sounded dubious. Ha, hardly. My cooking skills peak at edible stir-fry, nothing more. Tony laughed. Lucky me, I've got my own gourmet chef at home. I'll catch up with you later. There's something I need to explain. About my role in the universe? Damien ventured, recalling Tony's veiled references. Exactly, but not now. Tony's voice dropped off as he ended the call. Damien leaned back in his chair, not one bit surprised that Tony, born with every privilege, could boast about never having to learn how to cook. After all, if you never needed to, why bother? Yet for Damien, that morning meal felt like more than just fuel. It was a quiet anchor to home, and somehow he feared that once he left, it might be silenced forever. That morning, Damien polished off his breakfast in under 10 minutes, snapped off every circuit in the house, and headed straight for Tony's manor. Pepper, knowing Tony planned to depart today, lingered by the entrance instead of rushing off to work. As Damien approached, she offered a slight bow. Good morning, Mr. Damien. I heard Tony wants to talk to you. Damien returned her bow with a warm smile. Morning, Miss Pepper. It's been a few months since we last saw each other. Pepper's expression remained polite, but carried a hint of worry. Tony asked me to remind you that the universe is far more than just Blue Star. He wants you to look after him out there. I believe in Tony's talent and strength, Damien replied, meeting her gaze. But the universe is unknown territory for both of us. Please take good care of him, Mr. Damien. Thank you, Pepper said, offering an appreciative smile. Though she smiled, concern still flickered in her eyes. Tony had confided in her at length, and now she finally understood the depth of his determination to explore the cosmos. Pepper shifted her weight from one foot to the other, worry creasing her brow. I'd love to come with you, she admitted, but Stark Industries on Blue Star still needs me. Neither you nor I trust anyone else enough to handle everything in our absence. After this mission, though, I promise I'll train a reliable second-in-command, so next time I can join you in the stars. Tony reached out and squeezed her hand. Pepper, don't worry. I've given you a cosmic communicator, so the moment I arrive, you'll hear from me, and if you ever miss me, just send a message. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. She nodded, still unsettled, but when Tony glanced over at me, Damien, and smiled, her features softened. I lounged on the sofa, pretending not to notice as they exchanged reassuring glances. At last, Tony tapped the communicator off and turned toward me. He dropped into the seat next to me, cheeks slightly pink. Damien, you made me laugh. I let a small grin slip across my face. Isn't that exactly what you wanted? Damien leaned back in his chair, eyes distant. Can you imagine living forever without a single person by your side? How unbearably lonely that must be. Tony Stark glanced over at Pepper Potts, a soft smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Well, I'm glad we've got each other, he said. Otherwise, I'd never be able to peel this suit off. Damien didn't look up. Lucky you, Pepper makes sure your armor's always removable. Tony's affectionate smile faded as he turned back to Damien. Seriously, if there's something on your mind, just tell me. No need to dance around it. Damien folded his arms across his chest. It's not like it's hard to explain. He let the silence stretch for a moment, then added quietly, You did know you'd hooked my armor up to your cosmic tracker, right? Pepper exchanged a worried glance with Tony. The room fell silent as the weight of Damien's words settled between them. Damien's voice was calm, but unmistakably authoritative as he addressed the small circle gathered before him. My alias in this universe is Cassidon, he said. It's the name under which I founded the Void Divine Religion, Among the faithful, I am known as Lord Cassidon, the living embodiment of the void. He fixed Tony with a measured stare. As a member of the void cult, you must always address me by my proper title, Lord Cassidon. You're free to forge alliances and recruit new disciples, but do not, under any circumstances, exploit my name to inflate your own status. Damien leaned back, his tone softening only slightly. In private, you may call me Cassidon, but on Blue Star, where our influence matters most, my name is not to be tossed around casually. Tony swallowed and bowed his head. Understood, Lord Cassidon. Your title is safe with me. I promise I won't betray your trust. A flicker of relief and a tinge of disappointment passed across Tony's face. He had hoped to leverage Damien's legendary reputation to climb the ranks of the cult. But Damien had seen through his intentions and shut down his ambitions before they could take root. Tony didn't dwell on regret for long. After all, Damien didn't mind him courting other members of the Void cult. He grinned and said, "Just remember this. I'm taking you to a planet called Xandar." "The Void cult's first stronghold is on a private island there," Damien replied, relief softening his tone. He leaned back casually. "It's the same world the Novacore call home. You really know how to pick your strongholds." Tony nodded. He'd learned about Xandar and countless other civilizations from the stacks of books Damien had smuggled back. True, the Kree homeworld rivals Xandar in technology, but their laws are a nightmare. Xandar's just as advanced and a lot more welcoming. He paused. "Anything else you're bringing with you?" Damien shook his head. "Nothing but the gravity device you built, and JIS. Without him, my research and invention pace would grind to a halt." Tony's eyes lit up at the idea of journeying to the heart of the Xandarian Empire. He laughed. "That explains why I haven't been hearing JRVS's running commentary around here." Damien watched Tony Stark tap commands into the workstation, then asked, "Did you shut down the original Jarvis first?" Tony shook his head. "No, I didn't dismantle him. I made a full clone, Jarvis 2, as a backup. The original's still online." Before Damien could respond, a calm, familiar voice spoke up from the speakers. "Master Stark, Jarvis 2 is at your service." Tony glanced back at the console and grinned. "Perfect. Jarvis 2, just follow Pepper's instructions for now." "Understood, Mr. Stark," came the steady reply, then silence. "All right," Tony said, rising to his feet. He stepped into the center of the lab, clearing away stray tools and prototype scraps. "Let's reload the war armor." He spread his arms wide and called out, "Jarvis, deploy the suit." Normally, the armor's repulsors would flare to life, and the golden red plates would swoop into place around him. Instead, there was a pregnant pause, so still that even the air seemed to harden. Damien held his breath, waiting for something to happen. "Sure, I'd be happy to help polish the chapter. Could you please share the full text you'd like me to revise? Once I have the original machine-translated passage, I'll rewrite it into coherent, idiomatic English and rename Harvey to Damien as requested." Chapter 110. Such a familiar excuse. Pepper's cheeks flared as she glanced away, determined not to catch Tony's eye. He had been planning this moment for weeks, a grand demonstration of his latest armor prototype, a technological triumph he was proud to unveil. He'd imagined Damien, a fellow engineer and fellow man, would appreciate the sleek design and powerful functionality. After all, there's an old saying about every man's secret romance with his mech. Sure enough, Tony had expected Damien to share in his enthusiasm, but instead of awe, Damien gave him a skeptical eyebrow. Tony felt his confident facade crumble. He wanted nothing more than to vanish into the workshop floor. Suppressing his mortification, Tony squared his shoulders and cleared his throat. "Jarvis 2, armor reload." "As you command, Mr. Stark," the second Jarvis responded almost instantly. With a hum of turbine jets, armor panels shot up from beneath the lab floor and snapped themselves onto Tony's frame. Despite his embarrassment, Tony watched the pieces click into place, smoothing into a gleaming, formidable suit. If only Damien, or anyone, would look impressed. But for now, Tony had to settle for one small victory. The armor was perfect. In a matter of seconds, Tony's armor shifted into the familiar crimson and gold Iron Man suit. He flexed his gauntlets, then quipped, "Don't get your hopes up. This is a brand new AI core. It's still working out the kinks." He turned and caught Damien's amused grin. "Honestly, you were pretty impressive back there when you yelled," Tony admitted. Accident or not, you look the part. Damien merely raised an eyebrow. This is how the transformation works, he said coolly. Before Tony's eyes, violet and gold plating wove over Damien's frame. A sleek golden mask snapped into place, and a white battle robe settled over his shoulders. His dark pupils glowed molten gold, lending him an almost divine presence. Tony blinked. He felt like the understudy who'd just realized he'd been playing the wrong role. How? Could you teach me to do that? He asked, awe and excitement mingling in his voice. Damien folded his arms beneath the robe and offered a small, confident smile. Once you've truly mastered the power of the void, I'll show you. All right. Tony recognized the familiar hum of void energy and immediately thought of the purple aura Damien had unleashed before. After more than 50 evolutions, Damien's growth had begun to slow. He'd only managed 81 ascensions in over half a year since joining the void. His physical strength was immense, but the range of his void power barely extended a dozen centimeters, a far cry from what he'd need to break through to the next stage. Come on, Tony said. Let's head down to the underground lab, grab your equipment, and get out of here. Knowing there was nothing more to learn right now, Tony followed without hesitation. He figured he'd have plenty of chances to train later, and truth be told, he was already gearing up for the moment he'd impress the rest of the team. Damien, oblivious to Tony's showmanship, simply led the way into the subterranean chamber. He held out his hand, void energy spiraling at his fingertips, and enveloped both the gravity device and Tony in a shadowy field. Suddenly, a miniature black hole formed beneath Damien's feet. In the blink of an eye, the two of them vanished from the complex. Moments later, Tony blinked against the harsh lunar light and realized they'd arrived on the moon. Damien stood within the shimmering purple energy shield, his gaze fixed on the distant blue planet and the swirls of white clouds beneath his feet. As a weapons technology specialist who among his peers hadn't dreamed of venturing into the cosmos, now that he was finally here, excitement and awe coursed through him. Without warning, a 1-kilometer-wide black hole ripped open beneath him. In an instant, he and his companion were swallowed by the void. How far have we traveled? Damien called, breath catching as the stars around him streaked by. The world snapped back into focus. A strange black and red planet loomed on the horizon, an alien sight that made his heart pound. That's well over 10,000 light-years from our starting point, his companion replied, voice as calm as if discussing the weather. And we're effectively on its doorstep. Before Damien could reply, the scenery shifted again. One moment they were floating through empty space, the next they stood before a solitary house. The purple energy shield winked out, and several large crates, each containing a gravity generator, settled with soft thuds on the ground around them. Damien took a steadying breath. They had crossed unimaginable distances in the blink of an eye, and now a whole new world awaited. Are we here already? Tony inhaled sharply as soon as he noticed the air. He glanced out the window and realized they'd arrived at a secluded villa nestled in the heart of a forest. He couldn't suppress a small smile. Looks like it, we've arrived. Damien inclined his head slightly. We covered tens of thousands of light years in under 10 seconds. Tony laughed in disbelief. That's just void magic at work, leaping across 10,000 light years? It's nothing. Damien's expression remained calm. Nothing. Tony's grin faltered. He knew Damien was powerful. After all, he'd casually mentioned that tangling with beings like the Ancient One or Odin would only be a minor annoyance. Damien must be one of the universe's heavyweights. Yet every time Tony witnessed Damien's abilities firsthand, he was reminded of how little he truly understood. Compared to most civilizations in this universe, Tony explained, they can't manage interstellar jumps in seconds. But with conventional technology and plenty of time, they can cross those distances in days. You still shouldn't underestimate it, Damien replied quietly, though his eyes betrayed a hint of amusement. Void magic may seem simple to me, but to everyone else, it's extraordinary. Tony nodded, letting the tension ease from his shoulders. Point taken. Let's get inside. There's much to discuss. Damien stepped off the platform, his cloak brushing the dewy grass. As Tony followed him toward the villa's heavy oak doors, both men felt the weight of the journey behind them and the challenges that awaited ahead. When Tony stepped into the enormous chamber, his eyes went wide. Sleek consoles lined the walls, each pulsing with soft blue light. Holographic schematics floated in midair, and strange machines hummed quietly in the corners. He turned to Damien, astonished. "You weren't kidding," Tony whispered. "This is beyond anything I've ever seen." Damien offered him a small, knowing smile. "Just remember what I told you before we came in." Tony furrowed his brow as Damien lightly brushed his arm and murmured something too softly for anyone else to hear. He hesitated, trying to recall the precise warning, but the swirl of unfamiliar technology made it hard to focus. Footsteps echoed on the marble stairwell, and a young woman with long blonde hair hurried in. She paused when she spotted Damien, and her face lit up. "Mr. Cassidy, welcome back," she said, voice warm and poised. Damien inclined his head. She glanced beyond him at Tony, eyebrow raised. Then, to a silent butler droid standing off to the side, she said, "Please prepare something refreshing for our guests." The droid clicked and whirred as it glided away. Sonia, Damien's housekeeper, turned back to them, a gentle smile on her lips. She studied Tony's curious stare, then nodded once briskly and hurried off to see the refreshment to completion. Once she'd gone, Tony let out a low whistle. "Mr. Cassidy, is that your girlfriend?" Damien laughed softly, the tension in his shoulders relaxing. "No, Tony, that's Sonia. She's my housekeeper, and more of a project manager, really. If you need anything for your lab, the layout, the materials, any modifications, Sonia's the one to talk to." Tony nodded eagerly, glancing around at the glowing displays. "Sounds good. I'll run Eve, Rithing by her." Damien placed a hand on Tony's shoulder. "Good. And Tony, try not to touch anything until you've spoken with her." Tony grinned sheepishly, and together they moved deeper into the lab, ready to explore the wonders it held, and to respect Sonia's carefully managed domain. Tony stared at Damien in disbelief. "I don't buy it. If they're just housekeepers, why don't you hire some right here in Blue Star?" Damien leaned back, unperturbed. Everyone in Blue Star knew he was a young, wealthy bachelor, still single, fiercely independent. He could have a dozen personal secretaries or a half-dozen maids if he wanted to. Yet here he was, brushing Tony's question aside. "Believe whatever you like," Damien said coolly. Tony snorted. "That's your usual line. But really, with your status and resources, what on earth are you afraid of? No one's chaining you down, are they?" Damien said nothing. His silence was more telling than any answer. After a moment, Tony's expression softened. He leaned forward, nostalgia in his eyes. "Look, I didn't bring you here just to trade rumors." Damien regarded him warily, waiting to hear what his old friend was actually after. Chapter 111, The Secretary's Standards. "Never mind. If you won't tell me, I'll figure it out on my own." Tony rolled his eyes, but let the subject drop. "Fair enough," Tony said, changing course. "Where will you stay while you're here?" Damien's shoulders stiffened, his expression tightening for a moment. Tony caught the shift and quickly moved on. "There are 4 villas on this island. Besides this one, you're free to pick any of the others for the time being." Damien eased back into his chair, relief flickering across his face. He rested both elbows on the polished conference table before him. "Before I even think about lodging," he said, "we need to decide what kind of laboratory I'm going to build." "The lab construction on Xandar is astonishingly fast," Tony agreed, sliding into the seat opposite him. "We can have you up and running in no time." Damien offered a faint smile. "Good. Here's what I need. Draft me the specifications for the equipment, materials, and support staff. Give me 3 days. Once I've integrated Jarvis into the system and gotten a lay of the land on Xandar, I'll know precisely which direction to take and how we can turn a sizable profit." Tony nodded, reaching for his datapad. He'd brought Damien here not merely to introduce him to the rest of the Void Cult, but to tap into his unrivaled talent for technological innovation. 3 days it is. Let's make them count." Damien Cassidy folded his arms behind his head and leaned back in the soft leather chair. With Tony Stark's backing, he'd not only secured the funds to pursue his research into alien technologies, he now had access to cutting-edge materials and exotic samples few on Blue Star could even imagine. It was a perfect arrangement, and for Tony, it was the chance to solve 2 problems at once. After all, countless scientists back home were desperate for any alien breakthrough they could get their hands on. Just then, Sonia reappeared, balancing a silver tray laden with crystal glasses. She set one before Damien. "Your wine, Mr. Cassadine," she said with a polite nod. Then she turned to the armored figure across the table and offered a long-necked flask. "And your drink, sir." He tapped his helmet, flipping up the dark visor to reveal a familiar, confident grin. "No need for formalities," he said. "I'm Tony Stark. Just call me Tony." Sonia's eyes gleamed as she recognized him. Billionaire genius, inventor of the renowned iron suit. Tony returned her look with an easy smile. He already knew that Sonia had ties to the Void Cult, and that she was close to Damien. In fact, his arrival in this universe had 3 clear objectives: to amass enough credits trading alien artifacts back to Blue Star, to indulge his passion for technology by upgrading his armor with newly discovered components, and to forge alliances, maybe even friendships, within the Void Cult, starting with Sonia, and now with Damien Cassadine. Damien leaned back in his chair, weighing his next move. It was always best to forge genuine friendships, then allies would be more willing to stand by your side in a fight. He cleared his throat and spoke into the small translation device. "Hello, Mr. Tony. My name is Sonia, and I'm Mr. Cassadine's housekeeper." Sonia's gentle voice carried across the room, and the device confirmed it. She spoke the same tongue as his employer. Her dark eyes flickered with curiosity as she offered him a warm smile. Tony cocked an eyebrow at Damien, clearly puzzled by the sudden introduction. "Sonia," Damien said, ignoring Tony's look of confusion, "Tony here is a brilliant inventor. His achievements in science and technology are nothing short of remarkable." He paused, letting the praise sink in, then continued. "He wants to establish a private laboratory on the island. Sonia, I'll need your help recruiting skilled workers and sourcing materials so we can get construction underway as quickly as possible." Sonia's expression softened into a professional smile. She tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear. "Of course, Mr. Cassadine," she replied. Damien shot Tony a reassuring glance, brushing aside the young man's lingering confusion. He returned his attention to Sonia. "Thank you. I'll leave the details in your capable hands." For a moment, Sonia looked momentarily surprised. She knew Mr. Cassadine had been away for nearly a month, but she hadn't expected him to return accompanied by a promising young inventor. Still, she said nothing more, merely nodded, and set about making the arrangements Damien had requested. Damien's breathing was still ragged as he stared at Tony. "Tony, forget about the lab for a moment. Could you get me a fresh cosmic communicator first? I need to call Pepper and let her know I'm okay." Tony Stark toyed with the edge of the workbench, fighting back a smirk. He nearly slipped up and used Damien's alien codename, but caught himself at the last second. "Sonia, could you bring him a communicator?" Damien noticed the change. Stark hadn't used his Blue Star alias, just his Earth name, and simply nodded. "Thanks." Sonia looked briefly puzzled at Tony's choice of address, but didn't hesitate. She hurried downstairs into the lab's basement and returned in under a minute, carrying a pristine communicator. The Xandarian Kree models weren't expensive, mass-produced for maximum compatibility and quick turnover, but they were rock-solid reliable. Tony took the device, pulled up a stool beside Damien's bed, and tapped in the coordinates. Even across light years, the little gadget linked up almost instantly. Not more than a minute later, Pepper's face flickered onto the screen. "Pepper? You there?" Tony asked, relief flooding his voice. Once Tony reassured Pepper that he was safe, she visibly relaxed. She wasted no time with her next order. He was not to meddle in Mr. Cassadine's affairs. Damien, formerly called Harvey, overheard this too, but Pepper made it clear that, since Tony was now operating in their universe, the secret of his cosmic communicator would remain between them. Tony promised he'd do nothing to jeopardize Damien's situation. He was here solely to help. Confronted with Pepper's anxious, stern tone, he could only nod in agreement. They spoke on for a few more minutes before Tony gently ended the call. "This cosmic comm is incredible," he murmured as he set the device aside. "It took barely a minute to connect us, even over those unimaginable distances." He reached out, grabbed the drink Sonia had prepared, and downed it in one swift gulp. "I'm going to scout for a good drop-off point," he announced. "I'll let you know once I've found one." With that, he activated the repulsors in his armor's boots and rocketed out the window in a flash of red and gold. After he was gone, Damien let out a slow breath and exchanged a determined look with Sonia. The moment had come to put their plan into motion. Chapter X, New Alliances. Sonia leaned forward, her smile brightening the conference room. Cassadine really outdid himself this time. This new recruit is not only fascinating, his prowess in science and technology is virtually unmatched. Damien nodded, folding his arms. With Stark on our side, the Void Divine Religion won't have to worry about funding ever again. He glanced at the dossier on the table. How long does Mr. Stark intend to stay this time? Sonia checked her tablet. Indefinitely, at least for now. I'm here to vet the applicants who want to join our order. Very well, Damien replied, his tone matter-of-fact. Sonia allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. Tony's genius is obvious, she said, but highly gifted people often need help with everyday affairs. Damien smirked. So you're suggesting we assign him a secretary? Exactly, Sonia said, already tapping on her screen. I'll prepare a short list of candidates and let him choose the one he's most comfortable with. Damien raised an eyebrow. What criteria should we use? Just looks. Sonia laughed softly. Not at all. They must be professional, discreet, fluent in at least 2 languages, and flexible enough to handle Stark's eccentricities. Good, Damien roved, leaning back in his chair. Have the profiles ready by tomorrow morning. Consider it done, Sonia said, closing her tablet with a satisfied nod. Sonia flipped through the candidate files on her tablet, brow furrowed as she hunted for the perfect fit. Tony's already taken. Pepper is his fiancée now, right? So money isn't the issue, she said, scrolling. But let's not go for someone who's too easy on the eyes. Damien set down his coffee and leaned forward, brow steepling his fingers. Exactly. If Tony and Pepper hadn't made things official, I wouldn't care who he hired. But now that they're exclusive, the last thing we need is Tony waking up on a secretary's lap after a blowout party. He paused, making sure Sonia understood. Keep it professional. Someone competent, reliable, but not runway-level gorgeous. Sonia nodded, quickly jotting down Damien's criteria. Solid resume, discreet appearance, 0 distractions. Understood, she said. I'll arrange the interviews and bring you the top 3 candidates. Then we can run them by Tony. Perfect, Damien replied, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Let's get this wrapped up before Tony changes his mind, and before Pepper can veto every last applicant. Sonia looked up, determination in her eyes. Consider it done. End of Chapter 2. Stay tuned for the next update. Chapter 112, Tony's Journey of Discovery. As soon as Tony burst forth from Damien's villa, he shot upward into the sky, eager to take in the island from above. What he saw surprised him. The island was only partially developed. Aside from a modest harbor, a handful of living quarters, a lone temple, and a strange black tower he'd never noticed before, most of the land lay untouched. Now he understood why Damien had warned that the Void cult was strapped for cash. The place still had room for countless projects. Scattered across the island were barely a dozen inhabitants, yet their physiques were far stronger than ordinary people's. They sprinted across open fields with astonishing speed. Some waded into the harbor waters, diving and resurfacing with fish in hand. In both build and feature, they looked just like humans from Blue Star. If Tony hadn't already experienced the vastness of space, he might have convinced himself he'd simply returned home. Women were rare among these cult members. Aside from Sonia, the only woman Tony had met so far, he'd encountered just 2 others, both of whom were strikingly beautiful. Tony made a mental note to introduce himself properly once he'd landed and gathered his bearings. There was much to learn about this island, its mysterious black tower, and the people Damien called his followers, and Tony intended to uncover every secret. Damien hovered 70 meters above the training grounds, his steel armor humming gently as he monitored the area. Below him, on the oval track, a striking woman moved through her warm-up routine, every stretch and lunge perfectly accentuating her curves. She was one of Blue Star's most celebrated athletes, and even from Damien's vantage point, she drew admiring glances from everyone around. Then his heads-up display flickered. A red blip, moving at least at Mach 1, was bearing down on his position. If he hadn't been clad in reinforced steel plating, he might never have tracked its approach at all. Damien punched a button on his gauntlet and watched as the distance closed at an impossible rate. 10 seconds later, a lone figure materialized 100 meters off his starboard bow. The intruder was unmistakable, a lean, silver-haired man dressed in nothing but fitted combat leggings. With a powerful sprint, the newcomer dashed toward a towering hardwood nearby, scaled its trunk in 2 strides, and launched himself skyward in a breathtaking arc. He never quite reached Damien's altitude, but he fell with equal speed. At that critical moment, Kyle, Damien's longtime partner in the Skywatch Corps, rocketed in from the tree line. He dropped into a low squat and caught the plummeting man in his clasped hands. The impact drove a pair of shallow craters into the soft turf. Unfazed, the silver-haired stranger, who must have been called Renaud, pressed his feet against Kyle's bulging forearms and blasted off like a missile. In an instant, he rocketed through the air, closing the remaining 200 meters to Damien with pinpoint accuracy. The sudden leap set the stage for a confrontation that would test every ounce of their strength and skill. Everything happened in a blur. Damien sensed his opponent was about to strike. Despite lacking Jarvis's interface and unable to channel the full power of his armor, he felt exhilaration, not fear. During his time on Blue Star, he'd kept his Void affiliation secret and confined himself to solo drills. He'd never had the chance to spar at full strength. Now, Renoli clearly misunderstood his intentions, but Damien didn't want explanations. He wanted to fight. He engaged the boosters under his boots with a thunderous roar, rocketing down in a fiery arc. Fist cocked, he aimed a crushing blow at Renoli, but in a heartbeat, Renoli twisted sideways in midair, slipping the punch with uncanny agility. Damien's heart skipped a beat. Before he could recover, Renoli seized his armored wrist, vaulted onto his back, and locked their gauntlets together. Then, with a resonant crack, Renoli drove his boot into Damien's spine. The armor groaned under the impact, and Damien's legs gave out. He plummeted toward the ground like a falling jet, the roar of the collision already echoing in his ears. Damien fought to keep control, but though he could fire his foot-mounted thrusters to stay aloft, his arms were locked in a vice-like grip. If he couldn't break free, he wouldn't be able to defend himself, and he'd plunge straight to the ground. Just as he braced for impact, a powerful hand shot up and grabbed him. The world steadied beneath his boots. Blinking open his eyes, Damien found himself staring up at a man well over 2 meters tall, every muscle in his body coiled like a spring. A second figure, silver-haired and equally imposing, hovered a few meters away, having hauled Damien out of the sky. "Who are you?" the silver-haired man demanded, his voice cool but edged with warning. The giant beside him growled, "And what gives you the right to hover over Void Island?" Renoli, the silver-haired enforcer, kept his expression unreadable as he studied the armored newcomer. Before pledging himself to the Void cult, Renoli had teamed up with Kyle and the man known as the Predictor on perilous third-tier bounties that even veteran second-tier hunters dared not attempt. Their combined strength and hard-earned experience made intercepting unidentified flyers look almost effortless. Yet none of that mattered now. A stranger had dared to violate the airspace above Void Island, and Renoli would see exactly what he intended to do. Damien hovered just beyond their line of fire, Iron Man's repulsors humming in the chilly air. The 2 cultists kept their weapons trained on him, wary of pulling the trigger. They didn't know who or what he really was, and didn't dare eliminate him outright. After all, the Predictor stood ready. One pull of its trigger and Iron Man would be down for good. "Relax," one of them whispered. "You're Void cultists too, aren't you?" "Yes," Damien answered evenly, voice muffled by his helmet. He could feel their eager stares. He'd flown in hoping for a scrap to blow off steam, but now realized he'd underestimated them. Cut off from Jarvis's real-time battlefield data, his advantage had vanished. 2 against 1 in these circumstances spelled trouble. Better to come clean than get dismantled. "Very well," he said. "I serve the Void cult under Lord Cassidon." Renoli, the taller of the 2, arched an eyebrow. "A Void cultist who can fly? That's a new one." He stepped forward, studying the gleaming armor with suspicion. "You'll have to prove it." Kyle shook his head. "If you've been to the Void, you must have seen those impossibly huge creatures, right?" Sensing their doubt, Tony's mind raced for a more plausible story. "Renoli saw them too, didn't you?" Kyle shot a questioning look at Renoli. Though Renoli had bristled at Iron Man's earlier attitude, He'd found it disrespectful to the Void cult. There was no denying the truth behind Tony's claim. Those weren't mere monsters, Renali said softly. They're gods of the Void. Tony's expression softened. Exactly, they're the ultimate beings of the Void. Kyle folded his arms, still unconvinced. If that's the case, I guess that makes all of us, what did you call it, members of the Void cult? Tony shrugged and offered a friendly grin. You can call me Tony Stark. Iron Man's fine, too. He swept a hand over the island's rugged cliffs and shadowed valleys. Honestly, I was just curious about the island's layout. I didn't mean to offend, Tony said, tapping his helmet with a friendly grin. He'd noticed how much Renoli and Kyle admired Damien, and realized that insisting on a quarrel would only strain a budding alliance. After all, the two superhumans had proven themselves formidable in their brief sparring session, and in the future they could be invaluable allies to Blue Star. Renoli offered Tony a warm smile. No harm done. I'm Renoli, codenamed Supersonic. Kyle nodded. I'm Kyle, known in the field as Dashon. From behind Tony, a quiet voice spoke without preamble. And I am the Predictor. Startled, Tony turned. Perched in the branches of a tree, 50 meters back, was a man draped in a black robe, his face wrapped in white bandages. Clutched in his hands was a large, unfamiliar firearm, an intimidating piece of hardware that spoke of deadly precision. Despite his ominous appearance, Tony recognized him as one of Blue Star's own. Together, these four would shape the planet's future, so long as they could learn to trust each other. Damien had seldom encountered genuinely superpowered beings in all his years, until, upon entering this universe, he found himself face-to-face with three of them. This is the third installment. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe. Chapter 113, Even in Secret. Renali, Kyle's seer, Damien called out, squaring his shoulders as he took in the three figures before him. I remember you, Renali replied, nodding. How long have you been with the Void cult? Kyle asked. Damien's lips curved into a small smile. Far from feeling intimidated, he was relieved. Among these strangers, he finally felt a sense of belonging. Here, he wouldn't have to hide his abilities or worry they'd brand him as a moral deviant. Counting today, it's been 23 days for me. Renali exchanged a glance with Kyle. They'd assumed anyone so confident must be a veteran of the Void God sect. Yet Damien had barely been a member a month. You've only been here that short a time? I joined almost 9 months ago, Damien clarified. Then, choosing his words carefully, he added, but my stamina still doesn't match yours. Superpowered people really are on another level. Hearing Renali's surprised praise, Damien felt his pride swell. He'd long suspected that as the Prophet opened the Void's ranks to ordinary recruits, formidable newcomers would appear, and here he was, proof of it. He still didn't know how powerful the seer was, but one thing was clear. This gathering would be anything but ordinary. Renoli, Kyle, and the man they called the Predictor were three of the Vanguard's most battle-hardened officers, each having faced countless hordes of monsters. Standing before them in battered but still functional power armor was Damien, a senior by rank, yet clearly green on the battlefield. Renoli folded his arms and let his gaze travel over Damien's plating. You've been with us nearly a year, he said, but your combat resume is virtually empty. Wearing a senior's insignia doesn't make up for zero real-world experience. Kyle leaned in, tapping Damien's forearm where the flight drive interface buzzed softly. And about your armor's flight module, it only works if your plating reaches a critical density. Launching with under-reinforced armor is a one-way ticket to a splintered cockpit. Damien lowered his head, acknowledging the criticism without protest. I know, he admitted. I did take down a group of terrorists on Blue Star, but the gap in strength made it more like shooting fish in a barrel. It hardly counts as proper combat. The Predictor glanced up from his wrist console, where schematics and genetic mutation readouts scrolled continuously. We've all had an embarrassing first run, he said, offering a half-smile. What matters is how you learn from it. Renoli uncrossed his arms and took a step back, softening his tone. Damien, you've spent months running those evolution simulations. Surely you've discovered something. Any insight into accelerated armor adaptation could save lives out here. Kyle cracked a grin. Seriously, if you've got data that helps us mutate plating cells faster or stabilize reactive alloys under fire, we want to hear it. Damien hesitated, then squared his shoulders. The hum of the ruined battlefield around them was a constant reminder of what was at stake. "All right," he said. "Here's what I've observed about mutation thresholds under sustained combat stress." He launched into the findings he'd compiled, and for the first time, the three veterans listened with the attention of comrades who understood exactly how precious every advantage in this war could be. Damien leaned back, folding his arms as he regarded Tony thoughtfully. "When it comes to evolutionary paths, there are really two routes you can take. One is to consume. Eat as much as possible so your body assimilates that energy and grows stronger. The other is to adapt. Push yourself through harsh conditions until your body restructures itself to survive." Tony frowned. "Adapting that way must be brutal." "Exactly," Damien agreed with a wry smile. "Subjecting yourself to extreme cold, heat, or deprivation is slow and agonizing. Most prefer the feast and grow method. But here's what I've discovered. Your own ambitions actually steer the direction of your next evolution. In our words, whichever attribute you most strongly desire, whether it's strength, speed, endurance, or something else, your body will prioritize that in its next leap." Tony's eyes brightened. "So if I feel sluggish, my next evolution will beef up my stamina or muscle power." "Precisely," Damien said. "All other traits still receive a boost, but it's much subtler. The most dramatic gains go where your need is greatest, and you'll notice these changes quickly at first, sometimes within hours or days. But as you evolve more often, each upgrade takes longer and feels less pronounced. That's just the law of diminishing returns in action." "And the pace?" Tony asked, leaning forward. "At the start, you'll see results in a flash. Later on, each stage can stretch into weeks or months. Still, there's no rush. We have lifespans measured in centuries. Plenty of time to grow." Tony let out a low whistle. He'd spent so long puzzling over his own evolutionary quirks. Finally, here was someone who spoke his language. It felt good, at last, to find a fellow traveler in the mystery of their ever-shifting abilities. Damien listened as Renoli, Kyle, and Predictor peppered him with questions. "Why does my speed improve so much faster than my strength?" Kyle asked, frowning in concentration. "You can evolve when you adapt to extreme conditions," Damien explained. "So the real question is, what counts as a harsh environment? Does it matter which evolutionary path you take?" Predictor chimed in. These three had only recently joined the Void Cult, and now that they had a senior member to learn from, they were eager to absorb every scrap of knowledge. Damien couldn't help but smile at their enthusiasm. Teaching newcomers, watching their minds light up with each new insight, was deeply satisfying. For the next few hours, they traded questions and theories. When the conversation finally paused, Renoli leaned back and said, "You're new to this universe, right? You arrived just a short time ago, and with no credits to your name?" Damien shrugged. "That's right." Before he could offer to cover the next round, Kyle waved him off. "Don't worry about it. We've got you this time." Predictor nodded in agreement. "Next month, though, you'll treat us. Deal?" Damien grinned, relieved. "Deal. Give me a month to get settled in. I promise I'll buy the biggest feast you've ever seen." 1 month would be more than enough time to find my footing and start earning, he thought. Besides, in this universe, friendship mattered as much as credit balances. And in just a few hours, Damien hadn't even once name-dropped to smooth the way. He'd simply let his ideas and his good humor do the talking. Damien slipped away from the dinner table on the island, his conversation with the Void Cult members still echoing pleasantly in his mind. For the first time since arriving, he'd been able to speak freely, without masks or half-truths. That simple honesty lifted his spirits. After bidding them good night, Damien soared into the sky, though he kept his altitude low enough to spot a deserted villa perched on a cliff below. He landed on the grounds, slipped inside, and claimed it as his new refuge. No sooner had he unpacked his few belongings than a soft chime announced another arrival. Sonia, Mr. Cassadine's ever-efficient aide, stepped through the doorway. "Good evening, Mr. Prescott," she said, offering a small bow. "Mr. Cassadine asked me to arrange a personal secretary for you, someone who can manage your daily schedule and handle minor affairs." With a gentle gesture, Sonia summoned a holographic panel in midair. Photographs, ages, resumes, each candidate's qualifications scrolled by in neat columns. Damien leaned forward, eyes skimming the list. Technically, every woman presented possessed solid experience and the poise of a professional. He tapped his finger against his chin. Their credentials are impeccable, he acknowledged, but I'd prefer someone a bit more visually striking. Sonia's eyebrows rose. Visually striking? She repeated, puzzled. Think, Miss Lacey, Damien clarified, reclining on the sofa. Intelligent, capable, yet undeniably attractive. Is there anyone on this list who fits that description? A faint smile curved Sonia's lips as she floated the hologram aside. Understood, Mr. Prescott. I'll refine the search immediately. Damien nodded, already imagining a secretary who combined efficiency with a touch of elegance. Tonight, he thought, I'll insist on nothing less. Damien paused just outside the conference room, they lingering by the doorframe, as Tony Stark wrapped up his meeting with Sonia, the new secretary. He'd seen plenty of assistants come and go, but none had ever struck him as genuinely beautiful, at least not until now. Thank you for the compliment, Mr. Stark, Sonia said with a polite nod, her expression composed. Tony leaned back in his chair, a half-smile on his lips. You know, Cassadine insisted, solely for the sake of domestic peace, that I not be assigned someone too breathtaking. He didn't want Pepper stirring up trouble. Sonia's lips curved into a faint smile. I understand, sir. Of course, Tony continued, feigning disappointment. If you'd prefer a more glamorous secretary, I'm sure I could make the arrangements. Sonia raised an eyebrow. Only if you can convince your wife. Tony's grin wavered. He glanced toward the door, then back at her. Can we keep this between us? As long as Pepper never finds out. As long as she doesn't know, Sonia agreed effortlessly. At that moment, Damien cleared his throat. Mr. Stark, you wanted to see me? Tony's relief was obvious. Ah, Damien. Yes, come in. I'll be with you in a minute. Damien slipped inside, leaving Sonia standing by the desk with an amused, knowing smile. Please, Mr. Tony, don't humiliate me, Sonia pleaded, her voice trembling. Tony ran a hand through his hair and looked away. Mr. Cassadine already made his decision. If I overstep or handle this poorly, he'll blame me for it. Sonia's shoulders slumped. She forced a polite nod, eyes downcast. I understand. Tony studied her crestfallen expression. There was no guarantee Damien would show mercy if he later asked for leniency on her behalf. With a resigned sigh, he turned to face the room. Very well. He scanned the assembled staff, seeking someone both presentable and competent to take on the task. Finally, he fixed on the executive secretary. Her professional poise and polished demeanor made her the obvious choice. You, he said, gesturing, please step forward and handle this. The secretary gave a crisp nod and approached. Sonia watched in silence as Tony's decision took effect. Chapter 114, 5 months later. All right, he'll be here by tomorrow afternoon at the latest. Sonia tapped the last box on the screen and glanced up at Tony Stark. I'll take care of his daily needs and handle any minor errands. If there's anything beyond that, he'll have to get approval from our secretary, Mr. Stark. Dinner will be delivered later this evening. Please make yourself at home. And if there's anything special he wants to order, he only needs to call me. I'll arrange it as quickly as possible. She offered Tony a polite smile, closed her tablet, and slipped out of the room. Tony sat back and watched the door close. He knew exactly what Sonia had picked up on and what he had been trying to hide. Damien didn't want to run afoul of Pepper, so he wouldn't be inviting any dates over or stirring up jealousy in Tony's fiancée. Well, that suited Tony just fine. Fewer romantic distractions meant Damien would be free to dive into the real work, exploring the universe's secrets and helping develop new technologies. With that settled, Tony stood and began surveying the sprawling villa. First order of business: installing Jarvis. Civilian-grade AI had advanced tremendously in the past few years, so getting the system online was easier than he'd expected. Within minutes, Jarvis's gentle voice filled the room, ready to manage everything from climate control to security protocols. Tony cracked his knuckles with a satisfied grin. 5 months in, and this place was finally starting to feel like home. Now the real fun could begin. Chapter 7. Tony Stark's boots settled onto unfamiliar soil as the sensors in his portable lab flickered to life. He glanced up from the console. Jarvis, where are we? In orbit around Xandar, sir, the AI responded crisply. We'll be based here for the next year. Good, Tony said, leaning back. First, Hook us into the local networks. I want a deep dive on Xandar's history and everything you can find on that prototype space fighter. Then start drafting blueprints for my new laboratory. As you wish, sir. With a soft hum, Jarvis tapped into the planetary database, combing centuries of archives, energy signatures, and schematics. Tony tapped away on his cosmic communicator, reviewing breaking news feeds, diplomatic summits, mining disputes on the moon of Torvus, pirate raids near the Helix Nebula. Each headline fueled his excitement, so many discoveries waiting to be made. A gentle chime announced an arrival at the villa overlooking the Xandarian skyline. Sonia slipped through the glass doors, her heels echoing softly on polished stone. Damien Cassadine rose from his desk, papers strewn across its surface, at her approach. "Mr. Cassadine," she said, bowing her head slightly. "All arrangements for Mr. Stark are complete." Damien arched a brow. "That was quick. Is he unhappy with our plans?" "No, sir," Sonia assured him. "Everything meets his specifications. The lab design is already uploading, and the ground crew on Xandar is prepped for installation. He's impressed with your resources." Damien allowed himself a rare, satisfied smile. "Excellent. Keeping Stark happy means smooth sailing for all of us." Sonia nodded once, pivoted, and departed as quietly as she had come. Damien watched her go, then turned back to the viewport. Beyond the glass, Xandar's twin suns dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in molten gold, an apt backdrop for the bold new era he was about to unleash. Tony had assumed that if he carried out his plan in secret, no one would notice. But I followed your instructions and persuaded him to drop the idea. Sonia tilted her head. "Do you really think that'll hold? Considering who Tony is? Probably not." She couldn't help but smile as she remembered what Mr. Cassadine had told her. On his home planet, Tony was a world-renowned tycoon. The moment he invents something and starts making credits, there's no stopping him. If he ever gets that spark of recklessness back, he'll go right back to his old tricks. Damien nodded. He knew Tony's nature better than anyone. On Blue Star, Tony had lived in constant fear of revealing his identity and being branded an alien. And with Pepper always hovering nearby, he'd never dared slip up. But now, even though Tony and Pepper could exchange messages across the stars, they were tens of thousands of light years apart. The instant Tony perfected his invention, turned a profit, and had a little free time, he'd almost certainly revert to thievery. He can do whatever he wants. Damien told Sonia, "I've done my part. If he runs afoul of Pepper, that's on him." "Yes." Sonia gave a quick nod and slipped away to grab something to eat. She still had her daily training to complete afterward. Damien, meanwhile, remained perched on a high ledge overlooking Xandar, letting his thoughts drift ahead to the challenges that awaited him. On Earth, Blue Star, he'd already achieved complete financial freedom. Every day, money flowed to him effortlessly, and he intended to reach that same level across the natural universe. After all, idle wealth tends to vanish, and Damien wasn't about to let that happen. That was why he'd enlisted Tony's genius. Now he simply had to wait for Tony's inventions and breakthroughs to start turning a profit. As his own power steadily grew, Damien found himself increasingly eager for the day he'd finally confront Thanos. In the blink of an eye, 2 weeks passed. Tony's new laboratory was fully operational, and experiments were already underway. Meanwhile, thanks to Sonia's thoughtful attention, Damien's days were remarkably comfortable. He spent much of his time personally evaluating each new visitor who'd come to the Void Cult in search of strength. After a month of training, Renoli, Kyle, and the so-called Seer eventually departed, returning to their previous lives. Word of the Void Cult's blessings had spread like wildfire, and more pilgrims now journeyed to the island from every corner of the galaxy. Damien decided to shorten the waiting period to 10 days, although each new test would require longer preparation. 5 months passed in the blink of an eye. With Damien's virtually unlimited resources and Tony's relentless nights in the lab, they finally unveiled their own gravity generator. Compared to the models on Xandar, theirs was sleeker, more powerful, and far less expensive, built specifically for starfighters and warships rather than civilian craft. But this wasn't their only breakthrough. Traveling through the universe had exposed Tony to technologies beyond anything he'd ever encountered. Immersed in alien blueprints and theories, his creativity exploded. He re-engineered the repulsor thrusters on his iron armor, boosting its top speed and agility to levels no human or machine had ever achieved. Meanwhile, Tony has plunged headfirst into nanotechnology, determined to forge a suit of adaptive nano armor. Progress has been slow, the discipline is fiendishly complex, yet he remains undaunted. At this rate, he's certain he'll hit the pinnacle of his power well before 2017 arrives. And when he does, he can't wait to see just how he and his inventions measure up against the mysterious enemy looming on humanity's horizon. Over the past 5 months, Tony has poured a total of $865.34 million into his research, and the results are nothing short of astonishing. Mr. Cassidy, Sonia began, her voice brimming with excitement, Tony has not only overcome the gravity manipulation barrier, he's built a more efficient, far more precise gravity generator at a fraction of the expected cost. She paused, letting that sink in. Then she added, if he can now tackle advanced thruster systems and master wormhole jump technology, he'll hold the 3 core breakthroughs needed for constructing truly formidable space battleships. Mr. Cassidy looked up from the datapad in his hand. He said nothing, his expression calm, even as Sonia's eyes widened. Sir, she pressed, a note of bafflement creeping into her tone, have you been expecting this? He laid the pad aside and met her gaze. I've been watching Tony's progress with interest, he replied evenly. His initial work on gravity devices was basic at best, but he learned fast, transforming that preliminary design into a high-performance, cost-effective unit in under half a year. Well, that's the kind of leap I anticipated from him. Sonia nodded thoughtfully. She'd received regular updates from Tony's secretary all along, a steady trickle of tweaks and tests. Still, she hadn't anticipated such a dramatic turnaround. Tony's new generators were compact enough to fit aboard light freighters, yet powerful enough to open entirely new markets. The only holdup, Mr. Cassidy reminded her, was scaling the design up for larger warships, a challenge that would demand far more resources but promised untold profits. As soon as he cracks thrusters and warp jumping, Cassidy concluded, we'll have every major system required to outfit our own line of space battleships. And we'll be years ahead of anyone else. Sonia's excitement returned tenfold. I'll inform Tony at once, she said, already reaching for her tablet. He's going to be thrilled to hear you weren't surprised, especially by how quickly he's moving. With a final nod, Mr. Cassidy leaned back in his chair, eyes alight with the possibilities ahead. However, this technology can be fitted to both small space battleships and starfighters, which alone promises substantial profits. Recouping the 800 million credits invested in development will be straightforward once we secure a handful of major contracts with large corporations and the military. As I've said, Tony's scientific genius is practically unmatched, Damien remarked, smiling. Of course, he wasn't surprised by the outcome. 5th update complete. Special thanks to Mu Jiangyi for the reward. Chapter 115, Contact Channels. Sonia glanced down at her notes, then looked up to meet Damien's gaze. All right, she said, your first task is to reach out to the tax bureau, see what documentation we'll need to qualify for any special industry incentives. After that, contact the Nova Corps, find out if they'd be interested in placing a bulk order for Tony's gravity modulators. Damien folded his arms, nodding. He'd only been on the island for 6 months and still felt his reputation was thin. Negotiating with government officials and interstellar contractors was a far cry from tinkering in Tony's workshop, but this was Sonia's domain. Got it, he replied. If they're reluctant, I'll let them know you're available. They can ask for Mr. Cassidy directly. Perfect, Sonia said, smiling. Her confidence in Tony's new gravity device never wavered. If they want samples first, bring that up, and if they push back, tell them I'll handle it in person. Damien stood and stretched, ready to begin. I'll head into town and make the rounds. Hopefully, they'll be intrigued enough to at least grant us a meeting. Sonia watched him slip on his jacket. Remember, she added, this is negotiation. Be courteous, but stay firm on our terms. If they sense we're serious and that we've got the backing of Void Industries, they'll take us seriously in return. He gave her a confident grin. Understood. I'll report back as soon as I have news. As Damien stepped out the door, Sonia turned back to her desk, already drafting follow-up emails and planning factory layouts. With the tax incentive approvals and a Nova Corps contract on the horizon, the next phase of their operation was about to begin. And thanks to Tony's brilliant design, the future looked brighter and lighter than ever. Even if the Nova Corps passes on our offer, there's no shortage of corporations or planetary embassies on Xandar lining up for this technology, Sonia said, leaning back in her chair. So don't worry. Pick whoever makes the most sense and get it done. Damien nodded quietly. Understood. Satisfied, Sonia rose and slipped back into the adjacent room to retrieve the cosmic communicator. Simply inventing next-generation tech doesn't automatically net you a fortune. You still have to find willing buyers. Setting up our own company to handle production and distribution wouldn't be too difficult. Once we sort out manufacturing lines, operations, and marketing, the real challenge becomes securing reliable sales channels. Small orders we can take on spec, build a handful of prototypes, spend a bit on outreach, and hope for the best. But cracking the big deals? That's a different game. Without the right connections, we'll never get foot in the door. It takes time to win over the industry's heavy hitters, and even then, brand recognition alone won't close a multi-million credit contract. We'll need to prove real value, negotiate tangible benefits, and build strong relationships before we can bid on the kinds of astronomical deals that really move the needle. Sonia knew all too well how the arms trade really worked. The biggest players could use their clout and deep pockets to squeeze smaller firms out of every distribution channel. Left with unsold inventory, a weaker company would eventually be forced to sell at a bargain price, and the bulk of any profit would end up in their rivals' coffers. She refused to let Mr. Tony's revolutionary designs suffer that fate. Drawing on her 10 years of experience managing VIP clientele at the Golden Horizon Hotel, Sonia tapped into her private Rolodex of influential contacts. First, she drafted a discreet briefing note for several senior officers of the new regiment. Sir or Madam, you're invited to review the latest gravity drive prototypes developed by Damien, a brilliant young inventor. These units are lighter, more efficient, and far less expensive than current models, ideal for medium-class frigates and space fighters alike. If you're interested, please respond, and we'll arrange a detailed demonstration at your convenience. Sonia Delgado. She personalized each message to the officers she'd once served champagne and caviar, calling in every favor she could. Within hours, replies trickled in, some curious, others cautiously optimistic. Sonia allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. With Damien's gravity generators finally set to reach the right ears, Mr. Tony's company would secure the contracts they deserved, and the market would never see it coming. Damien lowered his phone and glanced at his coworkers, who were clustered around him with expectant looks. "Did Sonia really call you?" Jane asked, half in disbelief. "Isn't it odd? She's the big shot who wouldn't even look your way before." Mike chimed in with a teasing grin. "Yeah, after 10 years in that celebrity hotel, you still can't read these VIP types?" Damien frowned. "I know. That's why it caught me off guard." His phone buzzed again. He answered on the second ring. "Damien," came Sarah's crisp voice. "Don't mind the others. Sonia reached out because there's news. Mr. Cassidon has put her in charge of managing Void Island." Damien's eyebrows shot up. "Void Island?" "It's true," Sarah continued. "When Mr. Cassidon bought the place, everyone assumed Sonia's role would be purely administrative, just signing off on contracts. People made all kinds of jokes, thinking she'd just handle the paperwork, but it turns out he barely visits. She's overseen the entire build-out and day-to-day operations herself, and word is she's doing an outstanding job." "So the ones who laughed at her feel foolish now?" Damien asked. "Exactly. And they don't much like outsiders." Sarah paused. "But with Sonia's backing, you're covered. She specifically asked me to bring you in." Damien took a steadying breath. This was more than just another shift at the hotel. With Sonia's endorsement and a direct assignment on Void Island, he finally had his chance to prove himself. He tucked his phone away and squared his shoulders. "Tell Sonia I'll be there," he said quietly. "Thanks for letting me know." As he walked back toward the elevators, Damien felt a surge of determination. Void Island awaited, and this time he wasn't going to fade into the background. Sarah swept into the room, every movement radiating confidence. "Thank you, Miss Sonia. I completely understand," she said coolly, then tossed her red hair. Besides, Mr. Cassidy has been more than generous with his time. He's practically at my beck and call. Sonia paused, puzzled. Had she somehow offended Sarah in the past? But as she listened, realization dawned, and a sly smile curved her lips. I've heard that you've been growing more and more beautiful, she replied evenly. I always suspected the rumors were true, but seeing you now, well, you certainly live up to them. So let's dispense with pleasantries. Miss Sonia, what can I do for you? Sarah's lips curved into a practiced smile. Clad in a figure-hugging red dress that showcased her curves and fiery hair, she projected the very picture of warmth and approachability. No wonder, when she first arrived at the celebrity hotel and needed a mentor, she'd chosen Sonia without hesitation. Sonia looked so gentle, so unassuming. Only later had Sarah learned the truth. Beneath that soft exterior, Mysteri, Sonia was known among the villa managers as the strictest, most exacting overseer of them all. Because Sonia's reputation for being strictly business preceded her, Damien knew that if she'd reached out personally, it meant she needed a favor. He paused, then asked, "What do you need?" Sonia and Damien had been friends for 7 years, since before the last New Year, so there were no misunderstandings between them. He simply said, "I need contact information for a few key players on Xandar." "Give me a moment," Sonia replied, already fishing her datapad out of her bag. "I'll draft you an introduction letter. No promises, they'll all say yes, though." Damien nodded without hesitation. "That's fine." As he headed back to his quarters, Sonia's words echoed in his mind. These weren't ordinary contacts. On Xandar, the elites, each with assets in the hundreds of millions, guarded their comlinks behind strict privacy settings. Even if you knew someone's signal, you couldn't connect without explicit permission. A formal introduction was the only way to unlock their details. Only once the recipient reviewed the letter and agreed to admit him would their contact code become visible, and Damien intended to secure every one of them. "I know. Thank you for your help, Sarah," Sonia said, giving her friend a grateful nod. Sarah waved her hand dismissively. "No need to thank me. Since you call me senior, I suppose that makes me your mentor, so consider this favor well earned." "It's no trouble at all," Sarah replied with a smile. "I'm happy to pitch in." Sonia glanced at Damien. "Damien and I would love to get together sometime, whenever you have a free afternoon. You know how it is with celebrity schedules," Sarah said with a laugh. "Almost no days off in the whole year. Unless I'm lucky enough to retire early like you two, I wouldn't even know where to begin." Damien shrugged. "That's okay. When I have a spare moment for a walk, I'll swing by and pick you up." "Perfect," Sonia agreed. "And don't forget, we still need to rally the fans for votes and subscriptions. It's late 2010 now, and 2011 is just around the corner. We'll need all the support we can get before the heroes make their debut." Chapter 116, Not Famous Enough? 6 months had passed, and Damien had broken through to level 504. His hearing was now astonishingly acute. He could detect almost any sound within a 50-mile radius if he chose to listen. Naturally, he even picked up Sonia's conversation as she asked around for contacts among the big players in the industry. But Damien knew everyone operated at their own pace. Sonia hadn't landed a single lead yet, but it was still early in the game. He trusted her. Her track record for getting things done efficiently was one of the reasons he'd brought her on. Satisfied that Sonia would deliver, Damien turned his attention to Tony's villa. Tony had just finished the final tests on the gravity device and nailed down the sales channels, so he'd been granted a few days off. Damien figured it was a good time to go over the rollout plan in person. He strolled up the cobblestone drive to find Tony waiting on the front porch, a broad grin on his face. "Well, this is a nice surprise. You don't usually drop by unannounced. Everything okay?" "Everything's fine," Damien said with a smile. "I just wanted to review our strategy for the gravity device launch. We've got the technology and the distribution sorted, but we're lacking something crucial." Tony raised an eyebrow. "Let me guess, exposure?" "You hit the nail on the head," Damien replied. "We're not famous enough yet. No matter how groundbreaking the product is, if no one knows our name, we'll struggle to make the impact we need." Tony nodded thoughtfully. "Then we need a marketing blitz, a demo event, maybe a live exhibition for potential buyers, something that grabs headlines." "Exactly," Damien agreed. I want to invite key investors, big-name traders, even tech journalists if we can. Show them what the gravity device can do. Once they see its potential, word of mouth will spread like wildfire. Tony slapped his knee. I like it. I can handle the technical demo, make it spectacular. You take care of the guest list and publicity? Consider it done, Damien promised. I've got Sonia working on reaching out to her contacts right now. With a little push, we'll have the right people in the room. Tony crossed his arms, eyes gleaming with excitement. Then let's make this happen. We reel them in, dazzle them, and by the end of the night, no one will be able to ignore us. Damien nodded. That's the plan. I'll head back and finalize the invitations. Let's aim to hold the event in 2 weeks. Gives us time to build anticipation. Perfect, Tony said, already pacing back inside. I'll start prepping the demo rig. This is going to be legendary. As Damien turned to leave, he felt a surge of confidence. With Tony's invention, Sonia's connections, and a killer publicity push, they were about to take the world by storm. All they needed now was the right audience, and Damien was determined they'd have them eating out of their hands. It's not me who comes to visit you, Damien announced with a grin, but you who come to visit me. Tony didn't even look away from his hollow surfboard. He took a long sip of his drink, then felt the faint ripple of energy in the room, a sure sign Damien had arrived. Only then did he swivel around and beam. To celebrate our research breakthrough, Damien continued, I'm hosting a banquet tomorrow for all the Void cult members. But first, care for a drink right now? Tony set his board aside and held up his glass. Absolutely. Damien settled onto the sofa beside him. He knew better than anyone how monumental their achievement was. Tony had developed a gravity manipulation device that would revolutionize interstellar travel, and fortune would follow. The project had cost Damien over 800 million credits in funding, but Tony wasn't worried. In his days on Blue Star, he'd spent 18 billion on less promising ventures. Despite being new to the wider cosmos and running low on liquid assets, he was certain the device would hit the market within months. Repaying the investment would be child's play, and after that, a steady stream of would flow to both him and the Void God cult. Tony raised his glass again. Damien clinked it, and the two of them leaned back, already savoring tomorrow's celebration, and the bright future their invention would bring. Tony regarded Damien with a puzzled frown as he strode up to the bar in full armor and a gleaming gold mask. Even without seeing his face, Tony could sense Damien's mood had shifted. They'd known each other long enough to exchange whole conversations with a look. And since when did Damien ever drink wine? Alcohol bypassed him entirely. He usually preferred sweet, fizzy concoctions or rare fruit sodas. So why the heavy tread and the sudden interest in a glass of red? Damien set the wine down and let out a quiet sigh. I'm not in a bad mood, he said, lifting the glass but not touching it. It's just, I feel like my reputation isn't loud enough. Tony paused, studying the masked figure before him. Then he broke into a lopsided grin and raised an eyebrow. Reputation, huh? Tell me more. Please, Tony exclaimed, throwing up his hands. Your reputation already spans the galaxy. How much more famous could you possibly want to be? Damien arched an eyebrow. I'm curious, he said evenly. How shocked could you really have been when you first Googled me? At first, absolutely floored, Tony admitted, then slapped his palms together and spread his arms wide. Look, there are rumors about Cassidon everywhere. He was the first level 3 bounty hunter in history. Some worship him as a god, others fear him as a monster or even a disaster. But by far the most common title is Cassidon, God of the Void. No matter who's telling the tale or how it gets twisted, every one of them underscores his raw power. If I could ever reach even half that level, I'd consider myself unstoppable. He paused, brow furrowed. Oh, and I also checked out the God King Odin and the Supreme Mage, the Ancient One. You didn't exaggerate, they're top-tier legends. Their reputations alone keep the universe's nastiest monsters from ever setting foot on Blue Star. But something's off today. You wouldn't be bringing this up for no reason. What's really on your mind? Tony stood and poured a glass of wine for Damien before taking one for himself. What's on your mind? He asked, curiosity lighting his eyes. Damien settled into his chair, swirling the wine. It's about our sales channels, he began. I asked Sonia to mention me by name in her report. Tony offered a sympathetic smile. But she didn't? Not directly, Damien said. She barely spoke my name, just whispered to her team instead of calling me out. Tony nodded slowly. Ah, I see. Well, your work speaks for itself. Your reputation is already well known. Damien's lips curled into a wry smile. True, but everyone has their own style. You know better than anyone how talented Sonia is. She never fails to deliver on every assignment. That's exactly it, Tony agreed. She's meticulous. If she'd had any reason to overlook you intentionally, I'd expect her to say so. Damien took a steadying breath and lifted his glass. All I know is that my invention is brand new. I'm still establishing myself. One misstep like this can send the wrong message. Tony clinked his glass against Damien's. Then let's get it right, he said. We'll clarify the channels and make sure your name is front and center next time. Damien's tension eased. Thank you. With your help, I'm confident we'll fix this and give my invention the attention it deserves. Damien rubbed the back of his neck. I haven't built a production line or launched any real marketing yet. If you want these gravity units in your hands quickly, the only way is to lock in a major contract and start generating revenue right away. If you're afraid you'll end up with unsold stock draining your capital, then swallow your pride and negotiate with buyers. Only once supply and demand are locked in can cash flow smoothly, and that's when the big profits roll in. Frankly, this is the first time I've had to speak so humbly, but after this Our deal closes, my reputation will skyrocket. Then, with this gravity generator and the next inventions I'm working on, people will come to me. I won't have to beg anyone for business. Tony sat frozen in front of the cosmic communicator. Normally he and Sonia sent updates back and forth without any surprise, late-night pings. Between 6 in the morning and noon, Sonia would field a dozen calls in seconds, everyone clamoring for her attention and help. Yet here he was, stunned into silence by Damien's unexpected candidness. Damien watched Sonia step lightly from the study, file in hand. I'll have it ready for you right away, she said, voice steady and without a hint of complaint. Tony raised an eyebrow as he observed her. He'd never seen such effortless precision. Even Pepper couldn't match it. It was clear why Damien had chosen Sonia as his housekeeper. She simply got things done. Understood, Tony murmured, swirling the deep red wine in his glass. Damien closed the ledger before him and leaned back in his chair. For a moment, he was thoughtful, no longer puzzled by Tony's earlier expression. As long as it's handled, he said evenly. Tony gave him a slow nod. Miss Sonia didn't ask for your name just now. She figured it was a minor issue she could straighten out herself without calling you in. A quiet smile flickered on Damien's lips. Tony raised his glass, took a deliberate sip, and set it back down. In Damien's world, there was no room for empty boasting. Few could afford to talk down to others. Yet Tony reflected, watching him. For most people chasing profit, the dance is desperate, always seeking approval. But when your reputation precedes you, the tables turn. You no longer beg others to buy, you become the one they beg to serve. Chapter 117. Rich Tony. Tony's words of consolation had the effect he'd hoped for. Damien simply shrugged them off. If Sonia ever really needed help, Damien was confident she'd speak up. For now, he was content to down his drink and keep Tony company, then make his way home without another word. Tony, for his part, noticed that Damien didn't mention attending the celebration he'd planned for tomorrow. He didn't press him on it. He understood that Damien's standing in the universe was very different from the high society circles of Blue Star, and especially here on Void Island, where Damien wasn't expected to pop up at every gala and banquet. Once Damien left, Tony returned to his workshop and turned his mind to business. He'd agreed to wait until the gravity device sale was finalized before sending Pepper the good news. With that deal secured, he was certain he'd have enough in 7 months to buy himself a space fighter. And as profits continued to roll in, a medium-sized battleship wouldn't be far off, ideal for hauling cargo between Void Island and Blue Star. Of course, completing the gravity device was only step 1. Next on Tony's list, mastering wormhole jumping technology, developing more efficient thrusters, boosting Jarvis's computational power, and reinforcing his steel armor. It was a tall order, but then, Tony thrived on challenges. With every innovation, he moved one step closer to reshaping the stars in his own image. Tony knew they had to keep the Void God cult's activities hidden on Blue Star, at least for a while. Their first priority was to master the design and production of advanced fighter craft and interstellar battleships. Only once Blue Star had a fleet of its own could it break free from its planetary isolation and join the wider universe. And as soon as Blue Star opened its gates to the stars, news of the Void God cult would travel even faster. By then, being unmasked as cultists wouldn't bring ruin. At worst, they'd face a little envy and gossip. Damien, the cult's founder, had been deliberate in how quickly he let membership grow. The very first recruits were Tony and Pepper. Damien had personally vouched for them and waived any formal tests. The next group, led by Renoli, weren't so fortunate. They endured a grueling 4-day trial before earning their place. In less than a year, the Void God cult had swelled to 237 members. Had Damien simply let anyone who glanced at the Sacred Stone tablet join without challenge, they'd already number in the tens of thousands. But that wasn't their way. By keeping their circle small and their entry bar high, they preserved the secrecy and the strength needed to launch Blue Star into the interstellar age. Even a steady, modest growth has its advantages. That's the way of the Void Divine cult. Despite the whispers of ostentation or deceit, no member has ever gone on a rampage or broken its sacred vows. Once Damien helps Blue Star weather its crisis and guides it into the wider cosmos, there's every reason to believe he'll bring Pepper along too. In a few decades' time, long before the Void cult rivals Asgard, founded by God King Odin, the mere presence of Kassadin, the god of the Void, that is, Damien, will guarantee every cult member an unshakable ally among the stars. With that prospect in mind, Tony immediately tasked his secretary with recruiting more chefs. He then reached out to every member on Void Island to share the exciting news. A grand celebratory banquet was being planned, one that would honor them all with a feast to remember. As Earth's reputation climbed, every high society event, masquerade balls, charity galas, celebration banquets, became less about the food and more about networking, sealing deals, and forging alliances. Few guests even knew how to appreciate the cuisine. But for the Void God cult, a grand banquet was never to be missed. Such gatherings unleashed a surge of energy vital for accelerating their evolution. That evening, Damien was scrolling through his messages when a flood of notifications hit the Void God cult's group chat. All at once, Tony Stark is treating us to a banquet. When is it? I'm on a mission, should be back by tomorrow afternoon. Did you say Tony Stark? If I miss his feast, I'll regret it forever. I've got a shift at work tomorrow. Come on, this is Stark footing the bill. One dinner could rival week's pay. True, filing for leave right now. Count me in. Me too. Within seconds, the entire chat erupted with excitement. Damien tapped the screen, a grin spreading across his face. A Stark-hosted celebration was exactly the kind of opportunity the Void God cult lived for, and he wasn't going to miss it. Because of the Void God faith's rules, anyone who accepts a divine blessing must formally resign from the sect afterward. As a result, many members have already stepped down. A few, however, cling to their positions, determined to grow stronger first so they can earn more before they leave. Rumor has it that Tony Stark occasionally treats his friends to small dinners, and those left out have long envied the lucky few. Now Tony is going even bigger. He's throwing an open banquet for everyone and inviting guests of their choosing. When he proposed the idea, founded this community at Sonia's urging, the group buzzed with excitement. Sonia was in the middle of coordinating logistics when her phone chimed. She opened the community chat to find a flood of messages, plans, questions, seating requests, and couldn't suppress a knowing smile. Tony's backing meant the Void God sect would never again fear running out of funds. Even better, his generosity was pulling everyone closer together. Of course, Sonia herself had no intention of attending. Mr. Kassadin, her constant companion, wasn't one for lavish gatherings, and she refused to enjoy fine food and drink while leaving him behind at home. Sonia paused at the top of the stairs and cleared her throat. On the balcony beyond, Mr. Kassadin stood gazing out at the city lights. She stepped forward respectfully. "Mr. Kassadin," she began, "Tony Stark is planning a grand celebration banquet. He's asked for our support." Mr. Kassadin turned at her words. How much does he need? Sonia glanced back toward Damien, who was lingering just inside the doorway. She lowered her voice. He just wants a guarantee that we'll reimburse him afterward. Whatever the cost, he'll cover his own expenses up front. Damien, formerly known as Harvey, moved closer, his expression calm. He still had 2 billion credits in reserve. A few tens of millions more or less wouldn't make a dent. Fine, he said. Authorize the reimbursement. Tony's about to finalize the sale of his gravity manipulation device. Once that goes through, he'll have the funds, and he'll repay us immediately. Sonia nodded, relief evident on her face. Damien continued, almost to himself. It's been ages since Tony hosted a major charity ball on Blue Star. This will be a perfect opportunity for him to make a splash and for us to strengthen ties with his organization. Mr. Cassidy inclined his head. Very well, make the arrangements. As Sonia hurried off to relay the decision, Damien watched the skyline again, satisfied that the upcoming celebration would be both lucrative and politically advantageous. Chapter 12. Damien slipped into the conference chamber beside Sonia, where Mr. Cassidy was already reviewing the latest inter-universal research data on the holoscreen. Their experiments had exceeded every expectation. Humanity was finally traversing the multiverse. Tony, of course, was itching to throw a grand celebration. But strict protocols forbade any large gathering on the new frontier, and everyone knew how restless Tony could get when he wasn't in the spotlight. Damien cleared his throat. Sir, one more update. Our contact has agreed to place a $1 billion order. Mr. Cassidy's interest peaked. That's outstanding news. Any strings attached? Exchanging a glance with Sonia, Damien nodded. He does have one condition. He wants the opportunity to speak with you personally. Sonia arched an eyebrow. Did he specify why it must be me? Damien paused, then replied, He didn't name you directly. He just knows I brokered the deal and asked me to pass along his request. Sonia leaned back in her chair, considering. After a moment, she let out a short laugh. Of course he did. Well, set it up. I'll give him his audience. On my terms. Mr. Cassidy tapped his desk thoughtfully. Very well. Coordinate with our security and schedule the meeting for tomorrow. In the meantime, keep refining the proposal. I want every detail bulletproof. Damien and Sonia exchanged a satisfied look. With that, the future of their multiversal venture and a tidy $1 billion contract hung in the balance. Tony's party could wait. Chapter 118. Asking for instructions. I leaned back in my chair and asked, Do you know who's looking for me? Sonia glanced at me, her expression guarded. She hadn't offered the information outright, but now she cleared her throat. His name is Norman Halls. He's one of the Nova Corps' elite officers, second only to the top commanders in rank. He holds considerable sway within the new army. Norman Halls. The name was familiar. Elite officers don't go out of their way for a simple gravity device. I sat up, my pulse quickening. If he's sending for me, it's not to haggle over hardware. It feels more like a probe, a subtle test of my credentials. Or worse, an attempt to buy my loyalty and drag the Legion into the Void God cult's orbit. I rubbed my temples. I've spent my life clawing out of the lower class, earning every promotion through sweat and merit. I won't compromise my principles now, not to satisfy military suits who've spent their careers knee-deep in backroom deals and political maneuvering. Was anyone else with him? I pressed. Sonia shook her head, her brow knitting with concern. No, just Norman. He said he'd handle things personally. I stood and straightened my uniform. All right, let him come to me. I'll be ready. As she left to make preparations, I stared out the viewport at the sprawling armada beyond. If Norman Halls wanted a meeting, he'd soon have one. But I wasn't about to let him dictate terms or test how far I'd bend. Not today. Not ever. Chapter 5. Strategic Partnerships. Mr. Cassidy looked around the sleek conference chamber, his voice calm but authoritative. In addition to our primary contact, 8 other representatives have expressed interest. They'll be coming in over the next week to learn more about our operation. He let that sink in, then added, Ideally, we'll secure initial orders of at least 100 million credits from each company. Sonia flashed her holo display onto the polished table. Here's the list of major interplanetary corporations with branches on Xandar. Their reputations are solid. If our product quality holds, these partnerships could yield enormous returns down the line. Damien raised an eyebrow. 8 already? That's faster than we anticipated. A rare smile flickered at the corner of Mr. Cassidy's mouth. Excellent work, Sonia. Please arrange the meetings immediately. Damien straightened in his chair. I'll contact them today, and I'll also reach out to Norman Charles. If he's cooperative, I'll keep it cordial. If not, I won't pull any punches. Sonia glanced between Cassidy and Damien, sensing the slight tension when Norman's name was mentioned. She nodded without comment. On Xandar, Mr. Cassidy's reputation preceded him. Everyone knew of his influence, even if the Void cult's inner workings remained a closely guarded secret. Silence fell, punctuated only by the soft hum of the conference table's integrated consoles. Finally, Cassidy spoke again. Time is of the essence. I want firm commitments by week's end. Understood, Sonia replied, already drafting invitation protocols on her datapad. Damien rose, smoothing his jacket. I'll keep you both updated. Expect meeting confirmations by tomorrow morning. As they filed out, the chamber lights dimmed, casting long shadows against the gleaming walls. In Xandar's high-stakes arena, every alliance mattered. Damien knew the real challenge wouldn't be the deals themselves, but navigating the delicate loyalties and hidden agendas lurking behind each handshake. Sonia knew that Cassidy's reputation would inevitably draw the attention of Nova Legion's power players. She privately hoped the order would fall through. She was convinced they weren't genuinely after a gravity drive, but were simply paying an exorbitant price for a chance to meet him. And Sonia was well aware that Mr. Cassidy had no interest in bending to the whims of wealthy patrons. Yet, whether she liked it or not, she still had to present the billion-credit proposal to him. Norman Charles had just knocked and entered her office without offer. Any of his own opinions, Sonia couldn't afford to withhold what she'd learned or risk eroding his trust. Come in, Damien's calm voice called from behind the door. Sonia stepped into the sleek, softly lit study. Damien sat behind a low desk, his gaze steady as he closed the datapad in his hand. You sounded urgent, he said. She gave a curt nod. It's the Nova Legion. They're prepared to pay twice the market price for a single gravity drive, ostensibly just for the device, but you know how they work. Once they have you alone, they'll try to pry intelligence or favors from you. Damien considered this for a moment, then inclined his head. Very well, proceed as planned. Sonia exhaled, relief flickering across her features. She gave him a respectful bow and slipped out, leaving him alone once more. After the door closed, Damien rose and moved to the panoramic window. The vast tapestry of stars glittered overhead as he poured himself a cup of tea. He held the steaming mug between his hands and stared into the night, thoughts swirling. Ideally, he wouldn't have to confront the Nova Legion's newest weapon. Annihilating the New Star Legion itself would be child's play. What posed the true challenge was dismantling their organization and seizing control of Xandar. And at present, fewer than 300 followers remained loyal to the Void cult. Damien closed his eyes, savoring the warmth of the tea. The game was set. Now he merely had to choose his next move. Damien stood alone in the command chamber, weighing his options. Talented commanders were hard to come by, and Xandar's defenses needed more than just brute force. They required careful, long-term management. If the new type of Legion were wiped out, Star-Lord's plans would unravel, and the power gem would never reach its intended guardian. Yet outright war was out of the question. A full-scale assault would draw the entire Nova Corps down on them. Instead, Damien decided to rely on guile. He would let the Power Stone be delivered to Nova Prime's doorstep, then quietly build his authority from the shadows. By forging an alliance with the Void God cult, he could undermine Xandar's rulers bit by bit, striking fear into the government without spilling the masses' blood. After all, beasts and demons might terrify people into obedience, but only the promise of a higher power could inspire genuine faith and even sacrifice from loyal followers. He scanned the chamber's void energy monitor. Membership in the cult had just surpassed 5.86 million, and each new recruit added to their reservoir of power. But to summon Kazik, the Void Predator, the tyrant alien who had once been hailed as a hero, they would need at least 100 million void energy units. A daunting milestone, but not an unreachable one. Damien allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. The real campaign was only just beginning. Because the void was sparsely populated yet teeming with raw energy, Damien had tightened the rules on recruiting new members. He decided to cap his intake at 1,000 for now, a number large enough to reclaim the hero's origin quickly, but small enough to manage. If he bestowed blessings too freely, hidden lawbreakers might slip through and scatter across the universe. Left unchecked, they could spread like a virus among void cultists, even forming cannibalistic cells or daring to challenge God King Odin himself. And if Odin escaped unpunished, well, that would surely draw Zeus's attention, compounding the trouble. Just the thought of overseeing a massive following gave Damien a pounding headache. How Odin managed populous Asgard at all was beyond him. Choosing not to dwell on it, he pushed the worries aside, returned to the lobby, and lost himself in his favorite game. Meanwhile, Sonia was making significant headway. As long as potential buyers were willing to examine the prototypes, Damien had no doubts that Tony's cutting-edge gravity device would capture their interest. To start, Sonia politely declined Manda Hall's terms on Mr. Cassadine's behalf. Then she launched a broader outreach campaign. In just one day, she'd contacted over 200 prospects, and 16 of them agreed to send representatives to inspect the samples and discuss the technology in detail. 16 interested parties might seem modest at first glance, but given that Tony's name was virtually unknown in the marketplace, and they didn't even have to lean on Mr. Cassadine's reputation, this response was exceptional. If just a handful of these prospects placed orders, the contracts would easily total in the hundreds of millions of dollars. After accounting for production and development costs, they stood to net at least $800 million in revenue. And as Tony's gravity device gained a foothold and word of its performance spread, future orders would begin arriving at their doorstep almost automatically. Bounty hunting promises quick credits and unparalleled freedom, but legends like Mr. Cassadine are few and far between. Most hunters simply take assignments from the wealthy, collect their pay, and disappear until the next job. To build real wealth, you need more than bounties. You need an enterprise. Fortunately, Mr. Tony is a genius in weapons engineering. In this vast universe, rife with wars, overrun by monstrous creatures, and dotted with technologically backward worlds, there's never a shortage of buyers for cutting-edge arms. With Tony's designs and Cassadine's vast network, virtually every planet is a potential customer. Confident he'd never be short on funds again, Damien leaned back in his chair and allowed himself a satisfied grin. True, Mr. Cassadine didn't hand over every credit he earned, but the generous stipend Damien received was more than enough to live comfortably, and then some. Fourth update complete. If you enjoyed this chapter, please subscribe and vote. Chapter 119, Changes. The next day, Void Island buzzed with excitement over Tony Stark's grand celebration banquet. Tony had just unveiled his newest gravity manipulation device, an invention destined to make him a fortune. While most islanders were still debating which line of work would boost their income, Tony had already pivoted straight into arms dealing. On the civilian market, gravity units are usually modest gadgets for self-defense, setting traps or repelling attackers. Crafting such simple devices is within reach of many bounty hunters. But designing cutting-edge gravity drives powerful enough for starfighters and battleships, that demands a genius-level talent found on only a handful of planets across the universe. Even the largest corporations, armed with staggering financial incentives and lavish perks, rarely succeed in poaching these experts. Once hired, they tend to stay with one employer for life. Tony Stark did the unexpected. Instead of joining a corporate megafirm, he purchased a commercial gravity unit and, working alone, redesigned it from the ground up. The result was so advanced that every weapons dealer in the galaxy will soon be after him, and the profits are only just beginning. Damien watched with mild amusement as Tony Stark's latest demonstration drew a round of genuine applause from the Void Cult members gathered on the island. The engineers and mystics alike were in awe of Tony's uncanny knack for turning wild ideas into working prototypes. And of course, they were even more pleased when he jokingly promised to buy them dinner sometime soon. Money was never a worry for Stark, and he knew exactly how these small gestures kept everyone happy. 5 days later, the real show began. At midday, 16 sleek space fighters, each a different model, sliced through the sky in a perfectly pitched spiral before coming to a smooth hover over the island's clearing. The aircraft glittered in the sun, their angular wings and humming engines testament to cutting-edge design. "They've brought the test units," Damien remarked to a nearby technician. "We'll need to fly each one, log performance metrics, run stress tests, the usual drill." Around them, Void Cult members craned their necks to examine the unfamiliar machines. Curious eyes took in the fuselage insignias, Aegis Dynamics, Helix Aerospace, Orion Industries, but none of the badges belonged to the Nova Corps. Whispers rippled through the crowd. "Strange," one engineer muttered. "These aren't Nova prototypes at all." "No," another added, "but if their speed and handling match Tony's hype, and if he's right about the cost, he could be writing purchase orders on the spot." With a final mechanical hum, the fighters settled into position for inspection. Damien felt a surge of anticipation. Testing these new models might uncover the next big leap in space combat technology, and if the numbers held up, the Void Cult's arsenal was about to get a lot more interesting. A few days after finishing their bounty mission, Damien, Renoli, and the Predictor were unwinding at a lively island restaurant. Damien sat between two statuesque women, each about 1.7 meters tall, who pampered him with playful smiles and fed him bite after bite of exotic delicacies. Though tall by any standard, they seemed almost delicate beside Damien's imposing frame. Suddenly, a thunderous roar of thrusters cut through the chatter and clinking glasses. The three friends sprang to their feet. "That ship has to be here for Tony's gravity device," Damien said, brushing crumbs from his lap. Renoli shook his head. "But Tony's work isn't even known outside our sector. Who could have traced it so quickly?" The Predictor frowned thoughtfully. "Remember Tony mentioning Miss Sonia negotiates all the big deals? If anyone could attract corporate investors on a moment's notice, it'd be her." "Good point," Damien agreed. "Her connections run deep." "Shall we go see what's happening?" the Predictor asked. "Let's," Damien said, leading the way. They joined a gathering crowd of Void Cult members at the edge of the landing pad, just as a sleek space fighter descended, its hull gleaming under the island's twin suns. As the hatch hissed open, Renoli leaned toward Damien, but before he could speak, he simply vanished, swallowed by the throng. "Renoli?" Damien called out, scanning the faces around him. No answer came. The fighter's cargo bay doors ground open, drawing every eye, including Damien's and the Predictor's, toward whatever surprise awaited inside. Whatever was about to happen, they knew one thing. They had to find Renoli first. "Wait for me, baby. I'll be right back." Damien scooped up the little seer and hoisted him onto his back. Before dashing off, he playfully blew a kiss at the beautiful woman who'd just been feeding them. Then, with a burst of speed, he shot forward like a rocket. "See? I've got you. Next time, if you want this treatment, you should ask sooner," he teased over his shoulder. The seer nearly tumbled off when Damien spun around mid-stride, swearing under his breath. "Ha! I almost forgot you were there." Damien laughed, unapologetic. "What's wrong with that?" In an instant, a dark blur streaked across the ground behind them. Lacey, clad in sleek black tights that accentuated her athletic build, came to a skidding halt, bristling with indignation. "Damien, you almost ditched me for some random girl. I'm going to chew you out for that." The seer turned to her with an amused grin. "Sister Lacey, you're getting stronger every day." Damien glanced back at Lacey's approach and shrugged. "If you were as ruthless as her, you'd have left me behind too." At that, the seer rapped Damien lightly on the head. "Watch your tongue, you numbskull." "I tried, but I can't hold on any longer," Lacey groaned, her fingers slipping on the rocky ledge. Damien gave her a reassuring shake of the head. "Don't worry, we've got plenty of time. Just take it slow." Lacey opened her mouth to argue, but Damien held up a hand. "Lacey, you've already come so far. Your strength is off the charts. It's time to ease up." He studied her closely. After Tony Stark had confirmed her ability to absorb elements directly into her body, Lacey hadn't hesitated. She'd swallowed raw ore in the mines and even dove into the ocean to test herself against saltwater pressure. In just 6 months, she'd forced 147 evolutionary shifts. The pace had tapered off, but each transformation had left her exponentially stronger. The others had been envious when she bragged about evolving a dozen times in a matter of days. They'd tried to replicate her feats, only to spend a week unable to eat or drink without violent nausea. Damien had been among them. He still remembered the pounding headache, the emptiness that no meal could fill. Lacey cracked a small, wry smile. I know. That's why I ducked into the restaurant earlier, to keep from collapsing entirely. She rubbed her temples. Absorbing minerals speeds up the process. Sure, but it hurts. Every single time. Lacey wasn't particularly strong, but she'd learned to take on secondary bounty assignments and earn her keep without trouble. Thanks to Mr. Cassidon's mentorship and support, she'd finally shaken off the old days of relying on her body to make ends meet. Now she moved at her own pace, savoring good food and enjoying the comforts she'd long been denied. Kyle and Damien had grown in strength as well. The three of them, Lacey, Kyle, and Damien, now tackled level 3 bounties with remarkable efficiency, and their names were making waves throughout the hunting guilds. It's good that you understand, Kyle said, flashing a grin. We've still got years ahead of us. Lacey gave a soft laugh. If you're going to live that long, you might as well enjoy every minute. Damien leaned back against a tree trunk, arms folded. True, no matter how much time you have, it's wasted if you don't make the most of it. Not far away, the Void Cult's warriors moved like echoes among the towering pines. Over 100 of them slipped into the underbrush, closing in on a small clearing. At the forest's edge, curious spectators crouched behind bushes and fallen logs, determined to see what would happen next. Through a thicket of brambles, they watched Miss Sonia and Tony Stark step forward to welcome the newcomers, their voices low but charged with significance. Sure, please share the chapter text you'd like me to revise, and I'll transform it into a polished, coherent English version with Damien as the male protagonist. Chapter 120, The Allure of Technology. Welcome, everyone. As the assembled guests murmured greetings, Sonia stepped forward confidently. I'd like to introduce Mr. Tony Stark, the inventor of the microgravity device. Sonia didn't dwell on the curious stares around her. Over 30 representatives had come today to evaluate Tony's latest prototype. A tall figure with cerulean skin folded his arms and eyed Tony skeptically. You look rather young to be the inventor. Tony gave a wry smile. I appreciate the compliment, but I'm actually past 40. A hush fell over the crowd as voices buzzed. Everyone here was on official orders to inspect the device's performance. Courtesy called for a proper demonstration rather than idle chatter. How about I install my gravity unit on my armor right now and let you judge its capabilities firsthand, Tony offered. If you're not impressed, I'll remove it immediately. That sounds ideal, a gray-skinned delegate replied. We'd rather see results than hear more talk. Perfect. Please give me a moment. Tony tapped his communicator. Armor. Reload. Within seconds, panels and plating whistled down from above. The individual components hurtled through the sky at over Mach 2, each triggering sharp sonic booms that rattled the windows and sent a low roar echoing across the hangar. The onlookers' jaws dropped as the pieces assembled themselves around Tony, snapping into place with mechanical precision. In a matter of breaths, the gleaming war armor stood complete on his frame, its servos humming softly in anticipation of the first test. Damien, standing near the entrance, watched with awe. This was the moment he'd been waiting for, the technology that could redefine the future, demonstrated in real time by its brilliant creator. Tony tapped his helmet's side and nodded to the assembly team. All systems are green. Let's begin. A tense silence fell. Then, with a flicker of the gravity module's power indicator, the demonstration began, heralding a new chapter in the marriage of innovation and warfare. Damien hovered in the clearing as the armor recoalesced above him, its metallic plates breathing like a living organism. In a heartbeat, it descended, snapping into place over his frame. 10 seconds later, he stood transformed, clad head to toe in a gleaming gold and red exoskeleton that pulsed with humming circuits and hidden weaponry. He looked every inch the archetypal techno-warrior. It almost resembles Nova Corps gear, someone whispered from the perimeter. Looks can be deceiving, another replied. Nova Corps issues battle suits. This is full combat armor. A hush fell over the onlookers as they sized up the self-assembling rig. Across the galaxy, Nova suits were the stuff of legend, their star ratings dictating how much raw power a warrior could channel. Yet for all their fame, the core jealously guarded their secrets. Few outsiders ever mastered true Nova energy. Now, here was a humanoid armor system that not only rivaled their deployment speed, but seemed to promise even greater potency. If its rapid assembly was any indicator, its baseline performance was already leagues above anything seen in the field. Even though the Mark I armor wasn't designed for open space combat, its versatility on planetary surfaces made it incredibly valuable. Damien wasn't surprised when the delegation expressed interest in his steel suit. This was exactly the reaction he'd been aiming for. As far as most interstellar powers were concerned, he was still an unknown. A dazzling technological demonstration was precisely what he needed to establish credibility. Without saying another word, Damien engaged the suit's thrusters and rocketed into the sky. Jarvis, scan the structural layout of that space fighter and calculate the optimal mounting point for the gravitational module, he ordered. Understood, sir, the AI responded. A deep red glow flared behind the armor's visor as its sensors swept the enemy vessel. In moments, Damien streaked across the heavens, deploying one precision device after the next. The fighter's defensive systems flickered and failed, its reinforced hatch unlatched with a pneumatic hiss. The door swung open, inviting him inside, and leaving the onlookers absolutely stunned by the power of his technology. Under Damien's watchful eye, the team began disassembling and reassembling the armor, and the entire process ran like clockwork. Seamlessly bypassing the security protocols only underscored how cutting-edge Tony Stark's design truly was. When the humanoid mech finally roared to life, its thrust pushed it to Mach 3, perhaps not a universe record, but easily among the fastest speeds ever achieved. Representatives from over a dozen rival firms, invited specifically to measure its performance, stared in awe. An army equipped with these steel suits would be unstoppable. Across the galaxy, races might field devastating firepower or deploy genetic enhancements, but none could match supersonic flight or the precise control this armor demonstrated. In one leap, mechanical augmentation elevated ordinary mortals to powers once reserved for gods. Even the hardened members of the Void cult, veterans of countless cosmic wonders, found themselves utterly dazzled. "Renali, can you pick up his trail?" Kyle called, eyes wide as Tony Stark swooped through the sky, commanding the steel armor with effortless precision. Renali leaned against a nearby tree, arms folded, his gaze never leaving Tony. "Honestly, I could bring him down with one shot," he said. "But this suit, every component is Tony's own work. His genius is terrifying." The prophet nodded thoughtfully. Since joining the Void, Tony's physique had become superhuman, and his predictive instincts had sharpened even further. With the right technology and positioning, even targets outrunning several times the speed of sound were helpless before him. Knocking Tony from the air wasn't a technical challenge, yet no one could deny that this armor was a marvel of super technology, and if Tony chose to sell it, he'd amass an unimaginable fortune. It was obvious that Tony had no intention of mass-producing his steel armor for sale. If profit were his only goal, he'd simply market the gravity manipulation device he'd been perfecting. Kyle stared up at the suit as Tony streaked through the clouds. "Imagine outfitting every member of the Void cult with this," he said. "We'd have an army of walking tanks." Tony's voice crackled over the comlink. "Not a chance. This armor isn't for sale. It's too critical to our defense." Kyle shrugged. "Just wait until Stark's power grows. Maybe Iron Armor will then be willing to build a few extras for allies." At that, the prophet spoke, his tone measured and calm. Ever since joining the Void, he'd watched its gods drift freely between galaxies. He'd never doubted that one day, they too would learn to fly. All it would take was time, steady evolution, and ever-increasing strength. Chapter 8. Damien knelt beside the ruined armor, its once polished plating now scarred and singed under the overhead floodlights. He tapped a dented shoulder plate with a gloved finger. "I don't see how we can replace this suit," he said quietly. "Even salvaging the parts would take weeks." Lacey stepped in, holding her scanner close to the wreckage. "This wasn't just protective plating," she explained, scrolling through data. It was bristling with weapons, miniature missile pods, plasma turrets, precision-guided micro-rockets. If Tony Stark keeps pushing research like he does, this firepower's only going to get stronger. Damien leaned forward, elbows on his knees. That's the beauty and danger of technology. When you're low on resources, you rely on tactics, stealth, speed, surprise. But once you have the credits and the R&D, you simply bury your enemy under superior firepower. Lacey glanced around the empty hangar. Exactly. Any civilization armed like this could flatten a primitive world without giving the locals a chance to fight back. You can't blow a planet to bits, but you can sterilize its entire surface, make it uninhabitable, wipe out every living creature. That's why the galaxy layers on treaties banning bioweapons, planet-killer cannons, gravitic displacers. Everyone wants to avoid another atrocity. Damien's eyes flicked to the scanner's readout. Movement tracks, he said, pointing. Someone passed through here recently. Lacey swiped the display. Low-yield graviton jumps, she noted. They came this way about 10 minutes ago, and they're already getting clear of the blast zone. She frowned, tapping her comm link. If we don't intercept them now, they'll vanish before reinforcements arrive. He rose smoothly to his feet. Then let's make sure they don't slip away. Gripping his helmet under one arm, Damien met Lacey's determined gaze. Time to move. Lacey gave a curt nod and led the way out of the hangar. As they disappeared down the corridor, the shattered armor lay silent, a stark reminder of how quickly cutting-edge firepower can change the balance of an entire world.